Ms. Kesney, this is the Corey Porter. I have a couple of questions that would help me greatly if I got answered.
Yes.
Um, and I hope I'm not in trouble here. I found two spellings, and I don't know if it's two different tribes or just two ways of spelling it. The Chachil Dehi, and then the Kletsel Dehi. So Kachel or Kletzel, are they the same or two different tribes? And I'm off the record. I'm not typing this.
I understand. Yeah. So I'm looking. I certainly don't know the answer. So I'm looking. Is there anyone on the call who can answer in terms of spelling?
I believe Ketchel is the Calusa Indian Community Council, and then Quetzal Dihi is the Cortina Rancheria. Kind of two different entities.
So there's two different tribes. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping what we've only discussed in the past is the Kletsel. And then maybe today was the Calusa. Anyway, I guess that might need to be corrected in a transcript if I got that wrong. And then Elston, is it Elston?
Let me see.
And
That's
then,
what I have. Elston, Elston Bill.
And then Chairman Wright, Wright.
That I don't know. I think Chairman Mitchum has left us.
Okay.
Does anyone know?
Yeah, it is WRIG.
DHT. Okay. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
And I'm ready to go.
Great. And we'll get started. Welcome back, everyone. It is the afternoon of September 11th. We are reconvening the hearing with respect to the proposed Sites Reservoir project. We had worked our way through some of the cross-examination of Sites Project Authority's Panel 4, which is our witnesses testifying with respect to water availability. I believe where we left off was that I was going to turn things over to Mr. Fisher to ask a few questions of our witnesses. So if we could, I'll look to my team to make sure we have our witnesses. I see Mr. Walker. And now and Ms. Bizzoni, I think we can, there she is, great. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you very much. First, Mr. Walker, in your testimony last week, you stated that the authority does not approve or endorse the division's water availability analysis tool or its results. My question is about the reason behind that, and specifically, is one of the reasons because the division's WAA tool attempts to answer whether water is available for future regulatory requirements? Is that one of the reasons?
I think we'd say because it's attempting to answer that question and the question of unappropriated water at the same time.
Why is it inconsistent to attempt to answer both?
Because an in-stream flow requirement such as the 55% unimpaired flow requirement is not an appropriation of water, and an analysis attempting to answer the question of unappropriated water should only be considering valid appropriations of water or water needed for riparian uses.
Okay. And next question could apply to Mr. Walker or Ms. Bizzoni. You both characterize how you determine whether water is available for appropriation. And to make that determination, you must account for, in your words, quote, senior demands and the amount of water needed to remain in the source for in-stream purpose, end quote. I'd love to just get into both of those a little bit. First, on the second point, amount of water needed to remain in-stream. When making that determination, would you characterize your method of making that determination as complying with existing current regulations or based on current regulations?
Yes, so each of the analyses that we're attempting to answer the question of is water available for appropriation included all of the site-specific diversion criteria and all laws and regulations that were in place at that time, including water quality control plans like D1641, the current biological opinions, and the state incidental take permit.
Okay. And how does the prospect of future regulation or uncertainty around current in-stream flow requirements come into play, or does it?
I think the authority included term 96 in the application, which I know others have spoken to before. Maybe Ms. Bizzoni would like to add to that.
Yeah, I'll also add that the calcium 2 analysis based on post-processing of the rock-on LTO alternative 4 is a consideration of a 55% unimpaired flow scenario that was included. And then when it became available, the authority also analyzed potential interactions of sites diversions with VA flow assets, as well as how that may change net felt outflow. So future regulations and requirements were analyzed in those two scenarios.
Okay. And again, to either of you, for the time being, you consider 55% unimpaired, as you describe it, compliance with existing regulations.
Objection, misstates their testimony.
Can you try the question again, Mr. Fisher?
You earlier, okay, so back to determine water availability, you must determine, quote, the amount of water needed to remain in stream. Is that determination based on current regulations?
It varies by the different analyses performed. So in the historical and 3 of the 4 calcium 2 analyses, it was looking at current regulatory requirements and in-stream flow requirements. And then the calcium 2 analysis based on the alternative 4 rock-on LTO scenario, as well as the VA analysis, are looking at those potential future regulatory conditions.
Thank you. Are either of you aware of peer-reviewed fisheries science that indicates recovery of endangered species may require 80 to 90% of unimpaired flows? Are you familiar with this recent science?
Objection, assumes facts not in evidence and lacks foundation.
That's sustained. If you have a specific reference, we can start there, Mr. Fisher.
Okay. Dr. Richter has, along with several other scientists, come to this conclusion.
Is this in the record? Do you have something in the record to point to?
I honestly can't recall if I put it in the record, so I'll move on. So back to kind of the issue of determining availability based on how much water must remain in stream. Did either of you account for in the model a future scenario where Trinity River in-stream flow requirements increase, thereby reducing the amount of water that reaches the Sacramento River?
I think the short answer is no, but CITE's not proposing to divert any Trinity River water.
However, is it not true that the amount of water in the Sacramento at the points of diversion is impacted by the amount of water taking out of the Trinity and put into the Sacramento?
At times it may be, sure.
When is it not?
When minimal water is being moved from the Trinity and all existing requirements and are being met in the Sacramento, Shasta's full, those kind of conditions.
Are you aware of times that this is not the case? Specifically, are you aware of times when Clear Creek that comes out of Whiskeytown Reservoir is not flowing and thereby not augmenting Sacramento flows with Trinity River water?
Could you restate the question, please?
You said there may be times when the Trinity is not augmenting flows in the Sacramento. I guess I would say, does that mean, in your opinion, there are times the creek that flows out of the bottom of Whiskeytown Reservoir is completely dry, therefore Trinity River water is not making it to the Sacramento?
Well, the water in Whiskeytown is not 100% Trinity River water.
You are right. Okay.
A place for Trinity River water to make it into the Sacramento Basin.
Okay. If if there were a future scenario where in-stream flow requirements in the Trinity increased significantly, would that not impact site's ability to divert from the Sacramento River?
Objection vague and calls for speculation.
Okay, same question. If there, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to, Mr. Fisher, if you can break down that question, I think, please.
Okay. A significant portion of the Trinity River augments the Sacramento River. So anytime we talk about percent of unimpeded flows or how much is diverted from a specific point of diversion and the correlative unimpaired flow, that is the quantity of water that's contributed by the Trinity impacts those calculuses. The quantity of in-stream flow in the Trinity is not yet.
Stop right there. Is that correct in your understanding?
Is that correct?
I think I'd like the question repeated. I didn't. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I have this right. Is your understand? Hold on. If you, Mr. Walker, is your understanding that the calculation used to the calculation for unimpaired flows in the Sacramento River incorporates water exported into the Sacramento from the Trinity River?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay. Mr. Fisher, back to you.
Thank you. So similar line of questioning, if future regulatory scenarios increase the unimpaired flow required in the Sacramento River, could that render sites inoperable?
Objection vague and calls for speculation, lacks foundation.
The entire water availability analysis is based on senior demands and the amount of water needed to remain in stream. So this is really, really getting at the amount of water needed to remain in stream and the fact that it's truly not resolved.
Mr. Fisher, I think I understand. I understand the relevance. I think that it's the way you're asking the question, which I also don't understand.
Okay.
First of all, in this question, you asked whether it would render sites inoperable. So we need to unpack the word inoperable for one. And what you mean by that, maybe we can start there and work through it.
I guess I'll rephrase. Did your model run scenarios, or could your model run scenarios where in a regulatory scenario where more than 55% unimpaired flow is required to stay in the Sacramento River? Did you or could you run such scenarios and determine their impact on sites?
Well, hold on. First ask, did you? And then
did you?
No, as we described before, we relied on post-processing of the alternative 4 model.
Okay. So is it safe to say that most of your analysis assumes 55% unimpaired flow? Or most or all?
Objection vague as to which analysis. There's 6 analyses that they've highlighted and described.
So would it be helpful, Mr. Fisher, if we looked at, I don't know if we want to look at the table, are you referring, and it's not clear to me, are you referring to one analysis or the entirety, all 6 of the water availability?
Pretty much all 6 seemed to be based on an assumption that 55% unimpaired flow was required, was the underlying assumption of most of them or all of them.
Is that accurate, Mr. Walker?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Walker, what other higher unimpaired flow requirements did you utilize or assume if 55% was not the only?
That was the only. The alternative 4 model assumes a 55% unimpaired flow requirement.
Okay, so 55% was the only scenario you ran.
Correct.
Thank you.
Objection misstates the testimony. As to that one analysis, yes, but.
Okay. One more question on future scenarios. You had
hold on. Let's clarify this for the record, because I think there was some confusion here. So, Mr. Walker, it's, as I understand your testimony, one of your analysis incorporated a 55% unimpaired flow. I don't know, target is the right word, but minimum. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And the remainder of your analyses did not include any percentage of unimpaired flow and used other methods for maintaining certain levels of in-stream flows. Is that somewhat accurate? Or you can restate that so that is more accurate if you'd like.
Yeah, that's somewhat accurate. I think, as Ms. Bizzoni said a few minutes ago, the historical analysis, the calcium, and each of the calcium 2 analyses with historical hydrology, and then both of the climate change scenarios assumed existing regulatory criteria and the site-specific diversion criteria.
Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, and apologies. Did any of your scenarios consider a higher than 55% unimpaired flow scenario?
No.
Thank you. One more question on these lines. Are you aware of recent court decisions that held that flows needed to satisfy tribal reserved water rights are no less than and probably more than flows needed to satisfy the Endangered Species Act?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence and lacks foundation.
That's fair, Mr. Fisher. You can ask if he's aware of these particular court cases if you have the names.
Are you aware of the Bailey decision in the Klamath Basin that basically made this determination that ESA flows
Fisher,
are...
stop. That's enough there. Are you aware of the Bailey decision in the Klamath River Basin? Did I say that correctly, Mr. Walker?
I'm not.
There you have it.
Thank you. So the other aspect of determining water availability is about existing senior rights. You express concerns about the division's face value demand database. Is your main concern that this database could underestimate water availability?
I think the concern is that at times it could underestimate and at times it could overestimate based off of the assumptions used.
Okay. And again, part of your determination of water availability is it must account for senior demands. Do you consider unexercised riparian water rights a senior demand?
To the extent if those exercise riparian demands are again recognized by the State Water Board, then yes.
So for riparian rights that have not been registered or utilized, they're not taken into account.
Correct.
Are you concerned, or has anyone else expressed concern that future use of unexercised riparian rights could affect your calculations when determining water availability?
No.
Same question for accounting for pre-1914 water rights. Are you concerned that pre-1914 rights that have either not been perfected or quantified could in the future impact your results?
Well, to the degree that there was historical reporting data available for those rights, and that, again, that they've been recognized to the State Water Board, we included those demands within our analyses.
Okay, thank you. And it also on Friday, you spoke to projecting future water availability based on climate change. One question, are you familiar with the Water Board's 2021 staff report titled Recommendations for an Effective Water Rights Response to Climate Change?
Generally.
Would you say that your methodology to calculate future water supply accounts for climate change in the ways recommended in the staff report?
To my understanding, yes.
Also, in your climate projections, did you also account for the fact that in-stream flow needs may increase as climate change worsens?
No.
Thank you. Those were all my questions, but I'd like for just a moment to go back to scenarios where future regulation determines that 55% is not enough. I guess broad question for either of you. How have you accounted for that? Have you accounted for future regulatory scenarios that where it is determined the river needs more than 55%?
I'm going to object as vague and calls for speculation.
Well, let me try a question this way, Mr. Walker or Ms. Bizzoni, either of you. Does any of your analyses with respect to, do any of your analyses with respect to water availability consider an unimpaired flow requirement of higher than 55% in the Sacramento River or delta outflow? I'll make a compound question.
No.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Fisher.
Final question. Have in any of your conversations with Sites Authority, has the possibility come up that if this future scenario arises where more than 55% is in unimpaired flow is required, that the Sites project could become a stranded asset?
Objection vague as to stranded asset.
That's fair. Mr. Fisher, can you be more specific?
Has the discussion come up that if a more robust or greater than 55% unimpaired flow requirement is implemented in the future, that there would not be water to fill Sites Reservoir?
I can't say that I've been part of discussions that included that.
Okay. That's all I have. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thanks.
And I believe we'll go next to we still have this panel. I don't see, I see Nathan Bill is on. I was going to turn to Mr. Laverne Bill, but we can go to the, I don't see him on right now. If he has questions, I don't know if he has questions for this panel. Guys, we'll go to the Delta interests and we'll start with you. I believe, Mr. Reese, do you have questions for this panel?
Actually, my questions have been asked on a couple different occasions, so I actually don't have any further questions. And I don't believe Ms. Meserve does either.
All right. I think next I have questions from Ms. Meserve. Is that accurate? Just to make sure.
You're on mute.
Sorry, was that it? We can't hear you. Do you have any questions for this panel? You're right. Yeah, you're not on mute, but we still can't hear you. But maybe it's a no. You can do like, no. There we go. Great, thank you. I will look to, is Mr. King on the line?
Yes, I am.
Great. And we have an echo. You may need to turn off some of your audio if you have more than one. Let's work this. We may work this through a little bit together. So I'll go ahead and channel Mr. King, if you will, and I have these written questions for you, Mr. Walker, and it's I think mostly directed to Mr. Walker, but Ms. Bizzoni, feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. And the question primarily relates to the Colusa Basin and the Colusa Basin drain. So the way Mr. King has phrased the question here, Mr. Walker, is, do the water availability analyses materials include consideration of appropriative water rights in the Colusa Basin? And Mr. Hitchings, you can feel free to object. Don't be shy about objecting to me. I know it's odd, but here we are.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Walker, do you have a response?
Colusa Basin mean the geographic area of the Colusa Basin, or does it refer to the drain?
Yeah, let's ask this. Mr. King, did you mean Colusa Basin like the groundwater basin, the geographic area of the groundwater basin, or did you mean the Colusa Basin drain?
Well, in ERIMS, the ERIMS notice system, there's two basins that are with two acknowledged watersheds within the Colusa in the drainage area of the Colusa Basin, and one is.
I'm sorry, Mr. King. Could you start that over? I didn't track that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So in the ERIM system, there are two watersheds that come up in the ERIMS water rights database. One is called Colusa Basin, and one is called Cortina. And my question is, when you did your face value analysis or your water availability analysis, did you consider those appropriate rights in those watersheds?
So in yes, the short answer is yes, as those were included in the face value analysis, as that analysis includes water rights for the entire Sacramento River watershed.
Okay. So can you show me where the 1948 appropriative right held by T&M King Farms license 4433 is in the list of the documents you considered in your face value analysis?
It should be included within the spreadsheet, the face value tool spreadsheet.
Okay.
Is that AHO 47? Do you know, Mr. Walker?
It is, yes, HO 47.
And if we were to look, what is the, so how is it sorted? It should be sorted that the water rights associated with those permit numbers would be included within Exhibit AHO 47?
Yes, there's a worksheet on there that includes all the water rights included in the analysis.
And we'll work together on this, Mr. King, but let me follow up on this. Did your water availability analysis with respect to Funks and Stone Corral Creek consider demands by users on the Colusa Basin drain?
No, we only included water rights directly on Funks or Stone Corral Creek.
So it went down as far as the confluence, if you will, of the Funks Creek and the Colusa Basin drain?
Yes.
So your conclusions in your testimony with respect to water availability from Funks and Stone Corral Creek would not have considered, and this may be rephrasing the question, but would not have considered whether there were any demands downstream of the confluence of Funks Creek and the Colusa Basin drain.
With respect to availability from either of the creeks, yes, that's correct.
Understood. Thank you. Mr. King, do you have any follow-up on those?
So just to continue with that line, so it's my understanding that Katsudihi also has appropriative rights on the Colusa Basin drain south of that convergence. So is it correct that you did not include their appropriative rights?
Specifically in the Funks and Stone Corral Creek analysis, that's correct.
Okay. Then did you is it clear, is it correct that AHO 47 has a September 30th 1977 priority date in that spreadsheet in the output which is presented as AHO 47?
Are you asking relative to the availability calculations for sites?
I believe it's the face value. I apologize. I thought Mrs. Kinsey was going to ask my questions. I don't have my questions before me, but I believe it's in the face value analysis is AHO 47.
What was your question? Mr. King, I'm confused by I thought you were asking about a priority date.
When I look at AHO 47, it has a priority date in the upper right-hand corner of the spreadsheet, and it has the site's priority date. So I just want to be clear that that was sorted by that priority date. So to that effect, were permits issued or water rights after that priority date considered in that analysis?
So when the analysis is completed, it considers all demands senior to the September 30th, 1977 priority date as the demands that it considers to be, again, senior to the site's project authority's calculations of availability or of unappropriated water, excuse me.
And I apologize if I get the application permit number wrong, but the Maxwell Irrigation District water right, which has the 4 diversion sites. Sorry for the compound question. Is that T3305 with the 1995 priority date? Maybe Ms. Bizzoni knows that if I have the number right.
It's the number you wrote in your questions. I can vouch for that.
Yeah, so I think it's T. Okay, great. So
A030445.
Yes, was that included in your analysis?
A T usually indicates a temporary water right permit, so I am not sure.
Okay. In your technical memorandum that goes into refers specifically to Stone Corral and Funk's Creek, don't you assume that the Maxwell Irrigation District application is senior, has already been subordinated?
So I think we're mixing a couple different analyses here.
Yeah.
So in the Funks and Stone Corral Creek analysis, that's correct.
Okay. And then is for the purposes of determining face value, did you assume that the 1995 priority date application of Maxwell Irrigation District was subordinated?
For the Funks and Stone Corral Creek analysis, yes, we included all rights regardless of their priority.
Is it true that T3305 has 4 different diversion sites, including the Sacramento River?
Maybe to clarify, so I understand that we're talking about the same thing. Like Ms. Bizzoni said, if a water right has a T, it's a temporary application. If it has an A, it's, that's the actual application.
Mm-hmm.
Can we clarify that?
No, but I believe that application has 4 different assumed points of diversion, including the Sacramento River. Is that correct?
Again, can we clarify exactly which application we're talking about?
The T33405, I believe.
Well, now we're confusing numbers here.
Okay.
Do we need to look at the spreadsheet? What would help, Mr. Walker? Looking at the spreadsheet to verify this? I mean, I have what's written on what is written in your question, Mr. King. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. Walker.
Talking about the Maxwell application, which starts with an A, but we're referring to T. So I make sure.
And I will represent to you, Mr. King, that in your questions, you wrote it down as A030445.
There you go. I'm sorry.
Mr. Walker, the question, let's say, is with respect to A030445.
I believe that's correct, but it's been quite a while since I've looked at it. Maybe Ms. Bizzoni can confirm or elaborate.
I do believe there are 4 sources within that water right, if that was the question.
Yes, including the Sacramento River. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so can you explain the rationale why you would assume that that application, which has 4 points of diversion, should be given I guess a priority over downstream appropriate rights when it comes to the rights of water downstream users from Stone Corral and Funk's Creek?
Objection. Vague, and I assume facts not in evidence.
What are you trying to? I'm not sure what you're trying to ask, Mr. King. You're trying to ask whether the analysis assumes that water right has priority over what?
Or downstream appropriative rights.
Which one?
With all of them prior to 1995.
How about Mr. Walker or Ms. Bizzoni? Do you assume in your analysis that A030445 has priority over other appropriative water rights in the system?
We are using it to develop the demand that is senior to the site's points of diversions, relative to demands on the creeks. So not relative to each other.
What? What? I'm
So-
sorry. I completely don't
No,
understand.
that's fine. When we looked at the creeks, we have the site's demands. They're upstream of all existing water rights on the two creeks, the proposed 2 points of diversion at the dams. So we then looked at all of the water rights downstream along those creeks. There's a handful, and we used those, the face value of those water rights, to establish a monthly demand that would be senior to sites diversions. So we then looked at water available from the creeks and said the demand for these water rights is senior to sites, and that's what we analyzed. We didn't put them in priority of each other. We just said, after we account for this monthly aggregated demand of downstream water rights, was there water left per sites?
Understood. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay.
And I'll look to you, Mr. King. Now, what was with that understanding? What was your question? If it's still relevant.
Yeah, so I want to figure out what the right question is then wouldn't that mean that that water is not available for appropriate rights on the Colusa Basin drain itself?
Mr. King, I don't think I'm not testifying here, but I'm going to, well, it's not testifying. Mr. Walker already testified that the analysis for Funks and Stone Corral Creek didn't take water rights into account on the Colusa Basin drain.
Right.
So I'm not sure what answer you're looking for here.
No, in the analysis of using the maximum irrigation application, I guess my answer is the same question. Doesn't that in effect give priority to the consideration of that application over prior appropriate rights on the Colusa Basin drain?
Asked and answered.
I think we need to move on, Mr. King. I'm not sure that this is, it's not.
Okay. So
me.
two more questions then. In your analysis, did you consider any Federal Reserve rights of Katsudihi, or any Federal Reserve rights that may be asserted on behalf? Well, let me ask that one first, of Katsudihi.
Objection lacks foundation and assumes facts not in evidence.
Let me try this one, Ms. Bozzoni or Mr. Walker. Did you consider, in constructing your analysis, any Federal Reserved water rights, regardless of whether any claimed Federal Reserved water rights? We can put it that way.
To the extent they would be documented in the ERIMS database, they would be included. I don't know to what extent they are documented in the ERIMS database, so I can't say conclusively what is considered as far as Federal Reserve rights.
Okay. So any future asserted Federal Reserve rights by the USDA on behalf of seasonal wetlands would not be considered in your analysis then?
Any future rights would not be considered are not considered in our analysis.
Or any future asserted Federal Reserve rights on behalf of the Delavan National Wildlife Refuge or the Colusa National Wildlife Refuge was not considered either.
Objection asked and answered.
It's been answered, Mr. King. She answered that none of them.
So, okay, thank you so much. So my last line of questioning regards downstream beneficial rights did you consider any beneficial rights in the channel of the Colusa Basin drain below Davis Weir Dam and above Balsam Weir?
Objection vague as to beneficial rights.
Let's start with, let me try this. Mr. Walker or Ms. Bizzoni, did either of your water availability analyses consider in-stream flow requirements? We'll start with that to the extent that there are any in the Colusa Basin drain.
I am not aware of any in-stream flow requirements in the Colusa Basin drain, and none were included in our analyses.
And to follow up on that, did you include in your analyses any consideration for maintaining a certain minimum flow in the Colusa Basin drain?
No, there is discussion regarding maintaining flows in Funks and Stone Corral Creeks based on consultation with CDFW and others. To the best of my knowledge, those discussions have not extended beyond the creeks themselves.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much for the extended time, Presiding Officer Kinsey, and to the parties for allowing me to have my awkward questioning. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. King. I will next turn to I don't think Mr. Orndon is on, but if you are, please speak up. And otherwise, I'll turn to the room. Did I miss anyone who has questions for this panel on cross-examination? So I think I have I'll be very short, because most of my questions have been asked. And this is again with respect to Funks and Stone Corral Creek. Did your analysis of water availability in those two creeks consider groundwater rights in any way?
Our analysis, all of our analyses only considered water rights that are documented through ERIMS.
Thank you. And then do you have any analyses that considered water availability for the project if you were to completely bypass flows from Funks and Stone Corral Creek, just allow them to pass through the reservoir? Did you conduct any analysis that looked at that scenario?
I wouldn't say to answer that question directly. However, our historical analysis for the Sacramento River does not consider availability from the creeks. Well, actually, only the creeks themselves, the creek water availability, historical water availability analysis itself looks at the creeks. The rest are all focused on the Sacramento River. So, for instance, all of Mr. Walker's summary results in the last slide of his testimony summary slides, those numbers are all relative to the Sacramento River. They don't include the creeks.
Okay, so the water availability, is it correct that the water availability analysis for Funks and Stone Corral creeks would be water in addition to, that may be available in addition to the water that may be available under the other 6 analyses that we talked about?
Yes.
That Mr. Walker conducted. That's helpful.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, the face value analysis would include the rights that are on those creeks, as well as the potential flow that's available from them. But given the granularity of that analysis, it wasn't really appropriate to dial down to that level of detail.
Thank you. I think that's all I have. So with that, I will turn back to you, Mr. Hitchings. Do you have redirect for these witnesses?
Yes, we have some limited redirect.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Mullen, if we could pull up Mr. Walker's testimony, I believe it's 25C. And if you could scroll to the last page that shows table 2, and maybe zoom it so the whole table with the notes can be shown. Thank you. Mr. Walker, do you recall during the prior cross, there were some questions from several of the other parties regarding the analysis that's summarized in this table?
Yes.
And what is your opinion regarding the season of water availability based on the results of the analysis shown in this table 2?
It's my opinion that table 2 shows that there's unappropriated water available for the project, and that water is available for appropriation and diversion by the project from the September 1 through June 14th season requested in the water right application.
And is it your opinion that the results of the analyses shown in this table 2 show that unappropriated water is available for the maximum quantity that the authority has applied for, which is 1.5 million acre feet annually? Up to 1.5 million acre feet annually?
Yes. Although it's not shown explicitly in this table, there are a number of years that the volume of unappropriated water exceeds 1.5 million acre feet annually.
Did we lose Mr. Hitchings?
I was just
Is
going
that
to
what
ask for
happened?
him.
I think we may have. We'll hold
I
a moment.
don't see him.
Yeah. We'll give it another minute, and if we need to, we'll just call a 5-minute break.
I'm going to close out and log back in. Hi, this is Mr. Ferguson. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Mr. Hitchings had some technical difficulties right in the middle of that. So
I gather. Would a 5-minute break be helpful?
yeah, I think it would be. Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that. We'll come back at 1:56.
All right.
Angela, can you hear me?
Yes, but there's feedback.
How about now? Is that working?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, thank you. My screen just completely froze, but it seems like mine was the only screen that froze.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I think shutting down my computer and restarting solved the problem. So hopefully we won't have another incident.
That's okay. I'm glad it was you and not me, to be honest. I'll look to our court reporter. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
All set, thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, back to you, Mr. Hitchings.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I got frozen in the middle of the third question area that I had for Mr. Walker. Maybe we can pull up again, if we could, Ms. Mullen, the last page of 25C with that table 2 on it. Thank you. And my question, it was similar to the second one, but question here is it your opinion that the results in table 2 show that water is available for appropriation up to the maximum quantity the authority has applied for, which is up to 1.5 million acre feet?
Yes, although it's not explicitly shown here, as demonstrated in the historical and calcium 2 analyses, water is available in a number of years up to and above the 1.5 million acre feet.
And is it your opinion that the face value analysis underestimates whether unappropriated water is available?
Yes.
And what can you explain the basis for that?
My opinion largely is due to the fact of the storage water right assumptions that we made for the analysis, in that basically each storage right has the ability to store the full volume of their face value in every year, and we begin that accounting at the beginning of every year, which thereby again overestimates the storage water right demands, particularly at the beginning of the water year.
So in that scenario, it could be that it's the full face value and that it would assume that the entire storage amount is essentially diverted into storage every year, regardless of what the carryover storage may have been from the prior year?
Exactly. Yes. Regardless of carryover storage, regardless of any other requirements that may limit how much a water right could store. It's simply only limited by their face value demand.
Okay, thank you. That's all we have on redirect.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I will then go back around the room based on that limited redirect. Mr. Mulcahy, do you have any questions for this panel of witnesses?
No, I don't, because I'd have to try and figure out how to look back at the testimony, because I believe he said either Ms. Bozzoni or Mr. Walker testified that there was only water available for appropriation through December through June on one of the analysis, but I may have misunderstood that. So either Mr. Schultes or Mr. Boucher could address that.
All right, well then I will turn to the next Mr. Schutz. Based on the redirect, do you have any additional questions for the witnesses?
I have a brief question for Mr. Walker. I didn't fully understand his explanation of the storage amounts when he responded to Mr. Hitchings. Maybe I was just slow, but could you please restate the reason for which you think the storage amount could be met in every year, even though some of the maximum diversion amounts are less than the total storage amount shown.
I'm not sure I understood the latter part of your question.
In your table, you show a number, the maximum amount of water available, potentially available to store, correct?
We have an estimate. Are you referring to table 2 of my testimony?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, we have a volume of water available and a potential diversion volume.
Potential diversion volume, that's the one. And in some cases, those potential diversion volumes are less than the 1.5 million acre feet in the face value of the water right, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So is it, let me see if I understand this, is what you're saying that somehow water that's carried over in storage would then for the following year become part of the amount stored in a subsequent year, and that's why you're meeting the 1.5 million acre foot storage face value of the storage?
I think maybe a couple different issues are being conflated here. So Mr. Hitchings his last question was specifically related to the face value storage demands of all existing water rights in the Sacramento River watershed that we included in the face value analysis. And that was where the question related to carryover and prior seasons came into play.
I see. Okay. So it did not go to whether or not the site's authority would meet, or would on any occasion meet the full storage amount. Is that correct?
His question specifically did not.
Okay.
If that's what you're asking.
All right. Well, since his question went to that, then I don't think I have any other question. I think I misunderstood his question in your response. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Mr. Busher, do you have any questions within the scope of that redirect?
I do not.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, do you have any questions within that scope of redirect? Mr. Fisher may not be on, so we'll take that as a no. And then Mr. King, with that limited scope of redirect, do you have any additional questions?
It's just one question, and thank you. On the demand matrix, which I believe is AO47, it doesn't, can you tell me which watershed, which HUC8, I guess, watershed or base, I'm not sure what that denotes, is that which would include Colusa Basin and Cortina?
Maybe Mr. Walker can easily answer this, but your question on recross, your question has to be within the scope of Mr. Hitchings addressed in his redirect.
Oh, no, okay. Yeah, I'm wrong. Sorry.
But maybe you can, offline have an exchange about this. Thank you.
Okay. All right, sorry.
Did I miss anyone who has any recross questions within the scope of redirect? All right. I think with that, I will thank the panel. Thank you so much, Ms. Bizzoni, for having you here again. And Mr. Walker, I really appreciate your testimony in this proceeding and appreciate you starting late on a Friday and ending today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
With that, Mr. Hitch. And do you need a break to bring up your next set of witnesses, the panel 6 fisheries witnesses, right?
I think it would be helpful, thank you, if we could maybe take 5 minutes and just make sure we have everyone assembled, because we do have 5 witnesses on this panel.
Yes, that would be great. Let's go ahead and take 5 minutes. We'll be back at 2:11.
Thank you.
I'll start by looking to Ms. Cott. Are you ready to go back on the record?
Thank you, I'm back.
Great, thanks. And Mr. Hitchings, do we have your panel 6 witnesses?
Yes, I believe all are here and ready to be sworn in.
Great, and I will look to my team to start pinning. Will you go, do you mind, Mr. Hitchings, just going through the list of witnesses for us? For panel 6? Oh, everyone's ahead of me.
Yes,
Maybe they already know, but just for my benefit.
and it looks like we there we go. All 5 are on the screen now.
Oh, there we go. We have them. All right. All right, welcome. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and we'll start by administering the oath, and then I will hand things over to you, Mr. Hitchings. If you would all please come off of mute so that we can hear you. And I will attempt to do all 5 at once. So Ms. Unger, if you can come off mute. There we go. Great. If you would please raise your right hand. Mr. Wilder, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Spranza, Mr. Hasrick, and Ms. Unger, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Yes.
And let the record show, thank you, let the record show that all of the witnesses confirmed yes, or I do. And with that, I will hand things over to Mr. Hitchings.
Great, thank you very much. Just as a brief overview of this panel is intended to describe and explain the potential impacts of the sites project to relevant aquatic species and related mitigation, describe the aquatic study plan for Funks and Stone Corral Creeks, and to describe the related adaptive management program and planning for the project. And we have the 5 witnesses on this panel 6, which include Dr. Wilder, Dr. Greenwood, Dr. Unger, Dr. Hasrick, and Mr. Spranza. And we will start with Dr. Wilder, followed by Dr. Greenwood, then Ms. Unger, Mr. Hasrick, and Mr. Spranza. So with that, I'll turn to you, Dr. Wilder. Can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, it's Richard Wilder.
And you understand you are presenting your testimony under oath, correct?
Yes.
And is Exhibit Cites 17C an accurate statement of your written testimony?
It is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
I did.
And is Exhibit Cites 18 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes, it is.
You know, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if anyone else is on your audio. Dr. Wilder, I'm not sure if maybe sitting closer might help.
Sure, let me see if I can turn it down.
I am having a hard time.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes, that's sounding better. I hope it's better for the court reporter.
You
Well,
also, you sound a little soft. I'm not sure if you can turn up your volume.
Okay, I've turned it up. Is that better?
That is better, thank you.
Thank you. And then do Exhibit Cites 19 through 24 that are submitted with and cited within your written testimony, do they include true and correct copies of documentation related to your analysis of the potential impacts of the Cites Reservoir project to salmonids and other relevant aquatic species?
Yes, they do.
And is Exhibit Cites 279 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
Yes, 279C.
Yeah, thank you. 279C, that was the corrected version submitted. And did you prepare that summary presentation?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. Then at this time, would you please summarize your testimony submitted and as set forth in Cites 279C?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And if you could advance one slide, please. So I'll start off by saying that my summary testimony today follows my written testimony in terms of outline. So I've just provided it here as an additional help for anyone viewing this. If we could advance a slide. So I'll be focused on the upstream effects of the site's reservoir project to aquatic resources. By that, I mean upstream of the delta. Dr. Martin Greenwood will be covering the in-delta aspects or geographic location, as well as the YOLO and Sutter bypasses. I'll be focused on far field effects only, not near field effects. And by far field, I mean those not directly adjacent to the infrastructure associated with the site's reservoir project. And again, Dr. Greenwood will be covering the near field upstream effects. As well, he will also be covering the Sacramento River flow survival analyses for juvenile salmonids. And then Dr. Jason Hastrick will be covering the water bodies impounded by the project's proposed reservoir, namely Stone Corral and Foams Creeks. The upstream analysis is split into two types of analyses, flow related and water temperature related. And Dr. Sophie Unger here is available here today to assist with the technical details of the flow related analyses because she assisted me heavily in conducting those analyses. My testimony is primarily based on the results found in the final EIR and EIS. We can advance a slide, please. I'll be covering the Sacramento, Feather, and American rivers. And the inputs to these upstream analyses come as outputs from the physical models that we heard about in panel 3. They're listed here. And just as a reminder for you, I provide the type of output that they provide, as well as the rivers that they provide those outputs for. Next slide, please. So following my written testimony, my oral testimony here is split into 4 species groups: the salmonids, sturgeon, lampreys, and other species of management concern. Next slide. So turning first to salmonids, here's a list of the species and or races of Chinook salmon that I evaluated. Winter, spring, fall, late fall run Chinook salmon, as well as Central Valley steelhead. And in parentheses are the rivers in which we evaluated them. Next slide. So for the salmonids, we split up the analysis into life stage groupings. So for the flow-related analysis under the spawning and egg and alevin incubation life stages, we conducted a red scouring / entombment effect analysis. We conducted a spawning habitat availability analysis based on the weighted usable area or RUA analysis. And we also conducted a red dewatering analysis. For fry and juvenile rearing and migration, aside from the analysis that Dr. Greenwood will be discussing with flow survival of juvenile migrants, we conducted a rearing habitat availability analysis that is somewhat similar to the spawning habitat availability analysis, as well as a juvenile stranding analysis related to the red dewatering, similar to the red dewatering analysis that we conducted for the spawning and egg and alevin incubation periods, life stage. And then for the adult migration life stage, we conducted an evaluation that looked at the potential effects of passage at extremely low flows for adult migrants moving upstream. Next slide, please. In terms of the water temperature analysis, there were 4 analyses conducted for salmonids. The first looked at the physical model outputs of during the periods when individual life stages of species were present, looking at such things as exceedance plots and mean monthly water temperatures for key locations in the Sacramento Feather and American Rivers, and comparing the project to the no project scenarios. The temperature index value analysis was an analysis that looked at the frequency and magnitude of exceedance above a water temperature index values that were found from the scientific literature. And we did so by species and life stage. And then the tiered management approach was an attempt to evaluate the ability of the project to meet the tiered management approach of Shasta Reservoir summer cold water pool management from the Rock-on LTO proposed action. And we did so by essentially conducting the water temperature index value analysis by tier instead of by water year type. And then finally, the Martin and Anderson winter run Chinook salmon egg mortality models look at temperature dependent mortality of winter run in the Sacramento River. We also conducted an analysis that combines both flow and water temperature related mortality. This is the SALMOD model, and it looks at the effects of each of those factors on early life stages of Chinook salmon, and also provides a potential juvenile production estimate for the 4 races of Chinook salmon in the Sacramento River. Next slide, please. So I'm going to combine the flow and water temperature related analyses since they're similar. In general, we found that differences between the project and existing conditions would be minor for all the analyses of all the salmonids in the 3 rivers evaluated, and would not therefore cause unreasonable adverse effects. For the SALMOD model, we found minimal effects to fall and late fall Chinook salmon, but small beneficial effects to winter run and spring run Chinook salmon. Next slide, please. We evaluated effects to the two sturgeon species present in the system, green and white sturgeon. For the flow-related analyses, we conducted a spawning habitat availability analysis in the Sacramento River. We conducted an adult migration threshold analysis that was very similar to the analysis described for salmon, where we looked at very low flows to determine potential passage effects. And then for some of the other life stages, we assessed differences in mean monthly flows between the project and existing conditions, assuming that increases in flow are better for salmon, whereas decreases are worse for salmon, sturgeon. For the water temperature related analyses, we conducted the first 2 analyses that I discussed for salmon, namely the physical model output characterization and the temperature index value analysis. Next slide, please. So again, I'll combine these 2, both the flow and the water temperature related analyses. Differences between the project and existing conditions would be minor for all of the analyses we conducted for each of the life stages for both species in the 2 rivers that we evaluated them in, and therefore would not cause unreasonable adverse impacts to these species. Next slide, please. Moving on to lamprey, there are 2 species of lamprey present in the system, Western River and Pacific lamprey, both spawn in the Sacramento, Feather, and American rivers. For flow-related analyses, we conducted a red dewatering risk that looked at month-over-month changes in calcium 2 outputs. We also conducted what we call an amicetic dewatering risk by looking at the maximum reduction in stage over a 7-year period, which is the amount of time that amicetes spend in fresh water. And then for the water temperature related analyses, we conducted the physical model output characterization analysis described earlier, as well as the temperature index value analysis, although we also included ranges in those index values. So instead of just looking at exceedance above these values, we looked at occurrence of time outside of the ranges, both above and below the ranges. Next slide, please. And results indicate that differences between the project and existing conditions would be minor for all the analyses conducted, and therefore would not cause unreasonable adverse impacts. Next slide, please. For the other species of management concern, you can see the list here. They consist of basses, native minnows, and shad. For the flow-related analysis, there was much less information about these individual species. So we tried to grab what we could with respect to flow-related analyses. One was a striped bass egg transport analysis, where we looked at differences in flows between the project and existing conditions during the striped bass spawning season, under the assumption that increases in flows will improve egg transport downstream and therefore survival. We also conducted an American shad spawning and nursery conditions analysis that looked at differences in flows between the project and existing conditions during their spawning and nursery seasons. And it was essentially a very similar analysis where transport of individuals downstream is thought to improve as flows increase. And then we conducted a black bass habitat condition analysis under the assumption that an increase in variability is bad for black bass and more consistent flows are better for bass. Next slide, please. For the water temperature related analyses, we conducted the same physical model output characterization analysis. And in this case, we had only ranges that we evaluated. So I only put down here the index range analysis. And the results, similar to other species, are that the differences between the project and existing conditions would be minor for all analyses of all the species in the rivers evaluated, and would therefore not cause unreasonable adverse impacts. Next slide. So to conclude, it is my opinion, based on the analyses presented here and in my written testimony, that based on the results, based on those results presented here and in my written testimony, the operation of the site's reservoir project would protect salmonids, sturgeon, lamprey, and other species of management concern in waterways upstream of the delta. The differences in flow and water temperature model outputs between the project and existing conditions are fairly negligible or minor in the Sacramento, Feather, and American rivers, and would not cause unreasonable adverse impacts. And biological analyses based on those outputs indicate minor or negligible effects that would not be significant, adverse, or unreasonable. And that concludes my summary.
Thank you, Dr. Wilder. Who are we turning to next, Mr. Hitchings?
Yes, thank you. Our next witness on this panel is Dr. Maren Greenwood. All right, Dr. Greenwood, could you please state your full name for the record?
Maren Greenwood.
And you understand that you're presenting your testimony under oath, correct?
Yes, I do.
And is Exhibit Cites 104 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
I did.
Is Exhibit Cites 119 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
It is.
Do Exhibit Cites 118 and 120 through 138 that are referenced in your written testimony include true and correct copies of documentation related to flow actions in the YOLO bypass to enhance food web productivity and the analysis of potential impacts of the site's project for the California Endangered Species Act incidental take permit application for the operation of the project?
They do.
Is Exhibit Cites 263 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that summary?
I did.
Thank you. And with that, would you please summarize your testimony submitted and as set forth in Cites 263?
Yes.
And if we could pull that up, Ms. Mullen, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As I just mentioned, my name is Maren Greenwood. I'm an aquatic ecologist with ICF. Next slide, please. In this summary of my testimony, I'll provide an introduction and overview, discuss various groups of fish and aquatic species, and then conclude. Next slide, please. My qualifications are summarized in my written testimony and my statement of qualifications. I've worked on the CITES project for a number of years, and my primary involvement has been conducting analyses related to near-field effects, migration flow survival, floodplain-related effects, and delta effects. Next slide, please. My written testimony was primarily based on the final environmental impact report, environmental impact statement, which I'll also refer to as FEIR-EIS, and the incidental take permit application for operations. It's my opinion that CITES operations, mitigation measures, and adaptive management will reasonably protect salmonids, delta smelt and longfin smelt, green sturgeon and white sturgeon, and other fish and aquatic species of management concern from potential adverse impacts associated with the project. As I mentioned, I'll discuss each species group in turn. Next slide, please. First, I'll discuss salmonids, for which there's 4 species of Chinook salmon, as well as Central Valley steelhead. As I noted, my opinion is that the project will not result in unreasonable adverse effects to salmonids, which I'll explain more in the following slides. Next slide, please. Firstly, near-field effects, which are effects occurring at or close to the 2 project intakes, and which include factors such as entrainment, impingement, and predation. The potential for exposure to these types of effects varies depending on where salmonids spawn in relation to the intakes. For example, for Chinook salmon, all winter run, less than a quarter of spring run, and around 30 to 40% of late fall run Chinook salmon spawn upstream of the intakes, and therefore some portion of juveniles could encounter the intakes during downstream movement. Less is known quantitatively about steelhead, although they have major populations both upstream and downstream of the intakes. The CITES project's Bend Bridge pulse flow protection measure limits diversions during increases in flow and fish movement, thereby limiting potential for near-field effects, with the proposed criteria to be studied and adaptively managed. Only a small percentage of juveniles are small enough to be entrained because the intakes have fish screens, meeting fish protective criteria, and the available studies indicate that there is limited potential for the other negative effects I've mentioned. There will be fish monitoring and technical studies to inform the need for adaptive management, including factors such as fish and predator density and distribution, juvenile salmonid survival rates, and fish screen hydraulics. Mr. Spranza on our panel will speak more to adaptive management. Next slide, please. With respect to far-field effects, those are effects occurring far from the project's intakes as a result of changes in river flow because of diversions or reservoir releases. The potential for negative effects from the project to flow survival and flows into floodplains and bypasses will be minimized with the Bend Bridge pulse flow protection measure that I already mentioned, as well as the Sacramento River at Wilkins Slough minimum flow requirement. The project recognizes that there is uncertainty in the potential for effects related to the Yolo Bypass Big Notch project and flow survival effects, so these will be part of the adaptive management considerations. As part of the project's California Endangered Species Act permitting, habitat restoration mitigation will be done to fully mitigate flow-related effects to salmonid rearing habitat in the Sacramento River. Our analyses indicate reservoir release effects generally would be limited for temperature and water quality, but there are potentially significant metal and pesticide effects for releases through the Yolo bypass, which would be mitigated with an assessment of the net benefit of the releases, with the potential to cease these flows if there is no net benefit. Next slide, please. In the Delta, there would be little to no temporal overlap of salmonid occurrence with South Delta export of water released from CITES reservoir, therefore limiting the potential for entrainment risk. And our analyses showed minimal potential effects on juveniles through Delta survival from changes in river flow entering the Delta. Similar to the Sacramento River, habitat restoration mitigation will be done to fully mitigate flow-related effects to salmonid rearing habitat as part of the California Endangered Species Act permitting. Next slide, please. 3 different life cycle models were used to assess integrated effects of the project on winter-run Chinook salmon. These showed a general pattern of a slightly negative effect of the project with 2020 climate assumptions, which was used for the FEIR EIS, and a slightly positive effect of the project with 2035 climate assumptions, which was used for the ITP application for operations. This reflects the shifting balance of potential negative effects, namely diversions affecting flow survival, and potential positive effects, namely greater Shasta reservoir storage and lower downstream water temperature, giving greater early life stage survival. Next slide, please. Moving on to the 2 smelt species, the project has the potential for a positive effect on delta smelt from greater North Delta food web productivity resulting from summer-fall reservoir releases through Yolo bypass. These releases have the potential for negative effects as well, related to temperature, dissolved oxygen, pesticides, and metals. So there are mitigation measures to address these, including the net benefit assessment I mentioned earlier for salmonids. As with the salmonids, the South Delta export of site's reservoir water does not overlap the period of smelt entrainment risk, and South Delta protective criteria under which the South Delta export facilities operate would limit the potential for negative effects if there are small increases in X2 that change the distribution of smelt closer to the South Delta. Related to this, it's important to note that site's operations criteria include not adversely affecting the ability of others to meet applicable laws and regulations, such as South Delta entrainment restrictions for the South Delta export facilities. Next slide, please. Our analyses indicated that there would be little potential for negative effects to smelt from small differences in delta flow-related factors, in particular food availability, predation risk, harmful algal blooms, and low salinity habitat. There was also little evidence for potential effects on delta smelt survival or recruitment, with flows being slightly greater under the project during the June to August time period that has been correlated with greater survival. There is a potential for a small negative effect on longfin smelt abundance as a result of less winter-spring delta outflow, which would be mitigated with tidal habitat restoration. As I mentioned on the previous slide, site's operations criteria include not adversely affecting the ability of others to meet applicable laws, which in this case is relevant to delta outflow criteria that are in place as part of the State Water Project to limit the potential for negative effects on longfin smelt. Next slide, please. Turbidity is a component of delta smelt habitat, and our analyses showed that there would be a minor, less than significant increase in the percentage of suspended sediment that would be diverted as a result of project diversions. This will be validated through sediment monitoring and adaptive management to determine if a management response is necessary. On the basis of this and the other information I discussed, I conclude that the project will not result in unreasonable adverse effects to the 2 smelt species. Next slide, please. Turning next to the 2 sturgeon species, the potential for negative near-field effects is primarily limited to green sturgeon because white sturgeon primarily spawn downstream of the project intakes. The intake's fish screens would be expected to generally be protective because of factors such as approach velocity, except during the months of April and May when small green sturgeon larvae with relatively poor swimming ability could encounter the intakes. However, April and May represent the months when diversions for irrigation are starting, and so there is relatively little difference in diversions between the project and existing conditions. As I mentioned for salmonids, there will be fish monitoring and technical studies to verify the intakes facility's performance. Delta outflow related effects were assessed for white sturgeon and found to be limited and less than significant, because the largest recruitment occurs in wetter years when diversions are a limited proportion of river flow. The mechanisms for the statistical relationship are uncertain and could reflect upstream versus in-delta effects. Based on prior studies, I've focused on the delta outflow effect. Next slide, please. In contrast to the salmonid and smelt species, there is greater potential for overlap in timing of sturgeon susceptibility to South Delta entrainment and the timing of South Delta export of site's reservoir water. However, although there is the potential for greater entrainment of white sturgeon under the project, the increases would remain small at the population level. Other factors analysed for the sturgeon species include adult passage at floodplain bypass weirs and reservoir releases, neither of which were significant. On the basis of the information I summarised, I conclude that the project will not result in unreasonable adverse effects on the two sturgeon species. Next slide, please. We also assessed a number of other fish and aquatic species of management concern, which included a mixture of native species of special concern, such as lamprey and native minnows, species that are commercially fished, including starry flounder, northern anchovy, and California bay shrimp, species that are recreationally fished, such as striped bass, American shad, and the various black bass species, and southern resident killer whale, for which Central Valley Chinook salmon are a component of their diet. Next slide, please. The life history characteristics of these other fish and aquatic species of management concern mean that near-field effects of the project intakes would only be a concern for lampreys. Smaller larval lamprey could be entrained by the intakes, although impingement risk would be low because of the screen's approach velocity. Both the larvae and the downstream migrating juveniles tend to move during pulses in flow, such as during storms, so negative effects also would be limited by the Bend-Bridge pulse flow protection measure I mentioned earlier in my slides on salmonids. We assessed a number of far-field effects for these other species and found them to be less than significant. For example, related to floodplain inundation for Sacramento splittail and for several species which have delta outflow abundance relationships. South Delta export of site's project water was also less than significant because of factors including limited temporal and spatial overlap, entrainment not being a major driver of population dynamics, and nearshore habitat providing a buffer from entrainment. Next slide, please. The FEIR-EIS also concluded that there would be a less than significant impact on killer whale because of the contribution of hatchery origin Chinook salmon to the diet. And as I noted earlier, our analyses indicated that the project would have a limited effect on Chinook salmon. On the basis of this and the other information I discussed, I concluded that the project will not result in unreasonable adverse effects to other fish and aquatic species of concern. Next slide, please. So to recap, I conclude that site's operations, mitigation measures, and adaptive management will reasonably protect salmonids, delta smelt and longfin smelt, green sturgeon and white sturgeon, and other fish and aquatic species of management concern from potential adverse impacts associated with the project, which is to say the project would not cause unreasonable adverse impacts or jeopardize the continued existence of any endangered or threatened species. That concludes the summary of my testimony.
Thank you, Dr. Greenwood. Back to you, Mr. Hitchings.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Greenwood. Our next witness is Dr. Sophie Unger. So if we could have Dr. Unger pinned. Thank you. Dr. Unger, could you please state your full name for the record?
Sophia Axon Unger.
And you understand that you are presenting your testimony under oath, correct?
Yes, I do.
And is Cites Exhibit 55 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
It is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
Yes, I did.
And is Exhibit Cites 56 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
Yes.
Do Exhibit Cites 120 through 138 referenced in your written testimony include true and correct copies of documentation related to the analysis of potential impacts of the Cites project for the California Endangered Species Act incidental take permit application for operations of the project?
Yes, I do.
And at this time, would you please summarize your testimony submitted for this proceeding as it's set forth in your written testimony, exhibit sites 55, as you do not have a summary PowerPoint like the other witnesses.
Yes. So hi, everyone. My name is Sophie Unger, and I'm here in a support capacity. And as such, most of the work that I did on this project was summarized in the testimonies and the summary testimonies of Dr. Wilder and Dr. Greenwood. So here I mainly just want to say a little bit about what my role is in supporting the research that we did. I am a senior fisheries biologist with ICF with a doctorate in aquatic ecology, and my statement of qualifications is available as Exhibit Sites 056. I have worked on the CITES project since 2019, preparing and carrying out potential impact analyses for the California Endangered Species Act incidental take permit application for operations. And I also prepared potential impact analyses for the EIR-EIS and drafted some of its appendices and response to comment material. The analyses I performed include estimating the project's potential effects of upstream flow changes on spawning and rearing habitat for anadromous salmonids, sturgeons, lamprey, and other fish species, as well as estimating potential effects on availability of inundated floodplain habitat for rearing juvenile salmonids in the Yolo and Sutter bypasses and Sacramento River side channels. Portions of my testimony from both Dr. Greenwood and Dr. Wilder are based on my analyses. Dr. Greenwood used some of my analyses for his testimony concerning rearing habitat for juvenile salmonid created by inundation of bypass floodplains, and Dr. Wilder used my analyses for his testimony concerning upstream flow effects. I am here today in a support capacity to provide any necessary explanation or clarifications of my analyses. And that concludes my summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Unger.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Unger. Our next witness is Dr. Jason Hasrick. Good afternoon, Dr. Hasrick. Would you please state your name for the record?
Jason Hasrick.
And you understand you are presenting your testimony under oath, correct?
I do.
And is Exhibit Sites 58 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
It is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
I did.
And do you have any corrections to that testimony?
Yes, I caught a small error in my written testimony at page 8, paragraph 21, line 19, in which I referred to one of the properties that we sampled at as SCC BA4 instead of SCC BA3.
And so to be clear, that should have been referenced as SCC BA3?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. We can send a corrected version of that with an errata after today's hearing, if that is good for the record.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that correction, Dr. Hasrick. Is Exhibit Sites 59 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
It is.
And do Exhibit Sites 60, 61, 62C, and 63 submitted with and cited within your written testimony include true and correct copies of documentation related to your development of the aquatic studies plan for Funks and Stone Corral Creeks?
They do.
And is Exhibit Sites 265 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
It is.
And did you prepare that summary presentation?
I did.
Great. With that, would you please summarize your testimony as set forth in Sites 265?
Yes. Next slide, please. So I'm going to provide a brief outline here of my summary testimony. I'll briefly introduce myself and my role in the CITES project. then give an overview of the aquatic study plan and its various study components, and then describe the Funks Creek and Stone Corral Creek generally, and then the fish sampling that will occur in both of those watersheds, and then conclude my summary. Next slide, please. So these qualifications are identified in my statement of qualifications. I have a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from UC Santa Cruz. I've been working at ICF as a research biologist for the past 9 years. And since 2019, I've worked on the SICE Reservoir project on issues related to fish biology. Next slide, please. So the extent of my testimony is limited to my involvement in coordinating the aquatic study plan. The purpose of the plan is to conduct technical studies in what we're calling the reaches of interest to inform the SICE project on how to comply with the Fish and Game Code 5937 to maintain fish in good condition. So the following slides discuss this process and the study components of the plan. Next slide. So this is a map of Funks Creek and Stone Corral Creek, depicting their respective watersheds. The colored regions are simply the areas that are going to be impounded by SICE Reservoir. And I'll describe each of these creeks in further detail in the next slides. So next slide, please. I'll start with Stone Corral Creek, as was shown on the previous slide in the lower watershed. It flows about 4.5 miles through a canyon to the valley floor, where it meets the TC Canal siphon. And then after that point, it becomes an incised channel for an additional 3 miles, where it then crosses the GCID main canal. What's important about the GCID main canal is that it releases water into Stone Corral Creek for agricultural deliveries. And then about 5.5 miles below that GCID main canal, Funks Creek then flows into Stone Corral Creek. So it's a tributary to Stone Corral Creek. And then another 5 miles down stream of that confluence, Stone Corral Creek then flows into the Colusa Basin drain. Next slide. So then Funks Creek, also shown in that map, in the upper watershed, or the more northern watershed, has a drainage area of about 50 square miles upstream of the proposed Golden Gate Dam for SICE Reservoir. But from the Golden Gate Dam, it meanders kind of a short distance through these low ridges and grazing lands to Funks Reservoir. Funks Reservoir, as you probably already know, is a regulating reservoir on the TC Canal. And then below Funks Reservoir, there's this seepage that comes out at the dam that maintains perennial flow below that dam in Funks Creek for a short distance. Almost 4 miles of channels then go through agricultural land to the GCID main canal, similarly to what I just described for Stone Corral Creek. And GCID is also, it also siphons water into Funks Creek for agricultural deliveries. And as I previously described, Funks Creek then flows into Stone Corral Creek, 2 miles north of Maxwell, and then about a mile east of I-5. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of those two creeks again. You can see Funks Creek on the top and Stone Corral Creek in the bottom. It's fairly small, so apologies for the small labels there. I'll try to just guide you that if you can see the yellow circles, those yellow circles surround what we're calling the reaches of interest. They show sort of a tennis ball green for Funks Creek and then also for Stone Corral Creek. So what's important about those reaches of interest is that those are essentially the reaches that are primarily are going to be impacted by SICE Reservoir. Below that, so below Funks Reservoir, the TCCA, the Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority, controls water that then goes into Funks Creek. So that's not primarily impacted by SICE Reservoir. And then similarly for Stone Corral Creek, below the TCC, it then becomes primarily controlled by agricultural diversions in the surrounding farmlands. Next slide, please. So as I said, the purpose of the aquatic study plan is to collect information needed to address section CFGC 5937 or Fish and Game Code 5937. There are several components of the aquatic study plan to document existing hydrology, assess the flows for geomorphic processes, update aquatic species and habitat use as baseline and then post-operation as well. And then also be used for an operations plan to inform final design of release facilities and operational requirements for both the Sites Dam and the Golden Gate Dam. Most importantly, the aquatic study plan is finalized or was finalized in consultation with the Water Resources Control Board, CDFW, Fish and Wildlife Service, and Colusa County. Next slide. So this is just an example to show you how we're integrating our fish monitoring with other aquatic habitat surveys. And so what this is showing is this is one site in the reaches of interest where the fish community is being assessed along with substrate composition, riparian vegetation cover, what we're calling BMI or benthic macroinvertebrates, and then also taking water quality measurements. Next slide, please. And so this is unfortunately, this is a little bit hard to see, but what this map is showing are 4 different survey locations on Stone Corral Creek shown in magenta, and then 3 different survey locations shown on Funks Creek above Funks Reservoir shown in orange. I don't know if you can see that, but that's what that's about. And in each of those locations, the work that I just described in the previous slide is done. Next slide, please. So to get into a little bit more about the fish monitoring itself, the purpose of the fish monitoring is to establish a baseline, so pre-project baseline, and then post-operation assessments to meet Fish and Game Code 5937. And the way we're proposing to go about doing this is using a BACI design or a before-after control impact design before the project goes into operation, so up to 5 years pre-operation, and then after the project is operational, 5 to 10 years. And then the data that we collect from these studies will then be used to inform an adaptive management plan, which Mr. Speranza will describe. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of some of the sampling that we do for the fish sampling. Due to higher EC levels in these creeks, we don't eat electrofish to survey the fish in here. Instead, we use beach seines with block nets to basically block fish from escaping the areas that are being seined. Along with the seining and counts that we do, we're collecting water quality measurements, surveying the benthic macroinvertebrates, describing the substrate, riparian vegetation, all of that to describe the habitat along with the fish species that we're encountering. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, based on the information that I just presented in the above sections of my testimony, it's my opinion that the aquatic study plan will result in gathering the information that is needed to ensure that this project maintains fish in good condition in Funks Creek and Stone Corral Creek below the sites and Golden Gate dams in the reaches of interest. And that concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Dr. Hasrick.
Thank you, Dr. Hasrick. Our last witness on this panel is Mr. Speranza. Good afternoon, Mr. Speranza.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your name for the record?
Yes, John James Speranza II.
And you understand that you're presenting your testimony under oath, correct?
I do.
And is Exhibit Cites 103 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
It is.
And did you prepare that written testimony?
I did.
And is Exhibit Cites 204 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
It is.
Do Exhibit Cites 120, 136, 199, 200 through 203, 205, and 208 through 210 submitted with and cited within your written testimony include true and correct copies of documentation related to permitting and adaptive management program planning for the sites project?
Yes.
And is Exhibit Cites 275 an accurate summary presentation of your written testimony?
It is.
Did you prepare that summary presentation?
I did.
Thank you. With that, would you please summarize your testimony submitted for this proceeding and as set forth in Cites 275? And if we could pull that up.
For this is the court reporter. Could I ask him to maybe get closer to the computer? It's a little soft.
Sure. Let me know if you can't hear me. Next slide, please. Good afternoon, Hearing Officer Kinsey, board members, and members of the public. My name is John Speranza. I'm a senior aquatic ecologist and regulatory specialist with HDR. I've been working on the CITES project since 2019 as the Environmental Permitting Lead reporting to Ms. Alicia Forsythe. My presentation today will be a summary of my testimony by offering a high-level overview of the adaptive management concept, a review of the key components of CITES project adaptive management plan, a discussion of the role of uncertainty in adaptive management and the types of uncertainty the CITES project anticipates will be addressed by its plan, an overview of the proposed governance structure, and a summary of the conclusions in my testimony. Next slide, please. Managed natural resources such as the Sacramento River and San Joaquin.
I'm sorry, if you could go a little slower.
Sure.
I am having a hard time hearing you a little bit.
I will see if I can turn up my mic.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see how that goes. Yes, the managed natural resource systems, such as the Sacramento River and San Joaquin Delta, are dynamic and unpredictable. These characteristics, along with other sources of uncertainty and variability, such as climate change and species interactions, limit effective management of these systems. To account for this, resource managers utilize a systematic approach in their decision-making that includes learning from outcomes, adjusting management strategies based on new information, and promoting continuous improvement through science-based management and policymaking. This systematic approach is commonly referred to as adaptive management. Similar to the scientific method, adaptive management is based on observations and measured data, which allows an implementing agency to investigate and reduce known uncertainties and variability through assessing the success or failure of management actions and experiments. Because it is rooted in science with quantifiable results, adaptive management is the preferred approach to implementing management actions in the face of uncertainty and is commonly utilized by the state and federal resource agencies and universities across the country. Adaptive management can take many general forms in its approach, one of the more basic of which is the 6-step iterative process identified on this slide. The process starts with step 1, when the resource problem or management question is assessed by exploring management alternatives or relative experimental hypotheses. Step 2 is where management actions or experiments are designed to predict outcomes from current information. Step 3 is when one or more management actions or experiments are selected to be implemented. Step 4 involves monitoring the implemented actions through a robust data collection and direct measurement. Step 5 evaluates success or failure of an action by assessing whether the predicted outcomes were met or achieved. And finally, step 6, where the management actions or hypotheses are adjusted based on the success or failure findings identified in step 5. Embedded within this 6-step process is a technical learning component that allows resource managers to adjust ongoing management actions or experiments through or after completion to address unexpected outcomes or trends. Through the monitoring of outcomes following management interventions, adaptive management promotes the improved understanding about which actions work and why they work. The last component discussed on this slide is that to be effective, adaptive management must also include a governance structure to support and implement adjustments identified through the technical learning. The governance structure must be flexible and have the ability to make timely changes to policies and practices in response to what has been learned over time. Next slide, please. The CITES Reservoir Project's Adaptive Management Plan and overall Adaptive Management in Science program is anticipated to be modeled after the existing Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Adaptive Management Plan. The Delta Plan's three-phase, nine-step process forms the base of their overall Delta Conservation Adaptive Management Action Strategy, which is intended to protect, restore, and enhance ecosystems in the Delta. The site's project adaptive management plan would be similar in approach and form, and that would be a comprehensive, stepwise, science-based plan that would utilize an approach appropriate for our region and the best available science. The plan, do, evaluate, and respond methodology that would be utilized by the site's project will be the roadmap to inform the authority's overall adaptive management program. The program would prioritize integrating sites project study plans, management actions, and hypotheses with other similar actions within the region occurring within the Sacramento, American, and Feather Rivers, as well as the Delta. This will be done to maximize the regional efforts without creating duplicative programs. It would foster the advancement of regional scientific understanding, reduce uncertainty in the effects of project operations, and further avoid, minimize, and reduce potential adverse effects to fish and aquatic species through refinement of the project's operations and diversion criteria within this framework. The project's adaptive management program will also be a key mechanism to address and account for ecosystem variability and uncertainty, as well as inform and support the project's aquatic regulatory compliance program. This would include, but not be limited to, verifying anticipated ecosystem benefits under California's water storage infrastructure program, tracking consistency with the project's state and federal permits and mitigation requirements, addressing the areas of uncertainty identified in its environmental permitting documents, and accounting for future changes in ecosystems of the Sacramento, American, and Feather Rivers, as well as the Delta. Next slide, please. The project's 2023 final environmental impact report and environmental impact statement, as well as its application for an incidental take permit to operate under the California Endangered Species Act, identify uncertainty-related gaps that limit the authority's ability to predict biological responses to certain operational and management scenarios. This uncertainty stems from several sources, including but not limited to variation within the natural environment, inherent uncertainties in modeling, and the inconsistent results among the research conducted by the scientific community. The specific items currently identified to be investigated include the validity of the aquatic and hydrological modeling assumptions and results used in project planning and environmental review, the effectiveness of the project's water exchanges with Shasta Reservoir in meeting anticipated fishery benefits within the Sacramento River, better characterization of the timing and magnitude of the project's riverine pulse flow protection events, operational details surrounding the project's diversions to ensure minimum bypass flow at Wilkins Slough when sites is diverting October 1st through June 14th, the interaction of the project with the Fremont Weir Notch project, the frequency and magnitude of flows needed to maintain fish populations in Stone Corral and Funks Creek, the delivery and effectiveness of the project's ecosystem benefits funded under the Water Storage Investment Program, and the effect of climate change and future water supply on project operations. This process will be done in collaboration with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries Service, United States Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Water Resources, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and other regional partners as appropriate. Next slide, please. As discussed previously, to be an effective adaptive management must include a governance structure that would support and implement management actions that have been identified through technical learning. To do this, the authority intends to establish a governance structure that is flexible and has the ability to make timely changes to policies and practices in response to what is learned over time. The governance structure that is currently envisioned will include an adaptive management science team, an adaptive management committee, and the site's authority governing body. These entities will define the decision-making and implementation framework for the overall site's project adaptive management and science programs. The adaptive management science team will be the scientific core of the program and include individuals with expertise in fish biology, aquatic ecology, hydrology, geomorphology, and other related fields. These individuals will be responsible for developing a course of studies to evaluate the effectiveness of various management actions and recommend adjustments to flow and non-flow measures necessary to address and maintain the aquatic ecosystem function of areas affected by the project. The Adaptive Management Committee will oversee the science program. They will be responsible for coordinating with regional science and management programs, vetting recommendations from the Adaptive Management Science team, and forwarding recommendations to the authority governing body for review and approval. The site's authority governing body will review the proposed studies and management actions, coordinate with the resource agency leadership, approve, modify, or deny recommendations forwarded to them from the Adaptive Management Science team, and authorize funding to carry out the program. The governance structure is envisioned to foster communication and transparency among project partners, the public, the scientific community, resource agencies, and other relevant decision-making authorities, and to ensure collaboration among regional programs. Next slide, please. In conclusion, it's my opinion that the continued development and implementation of the project's adaptive management plan and overall adaptive management program, in combination with planned operational diversion criteria, proposed mitigation, and state and federal permit requirements, will provide a scientifically based process to reduce the outstanding uncertainty in effects surrounding the project's operations. This reduction and corresponding increase in knowledge gained through the adaptive management will facilitate the potential refinement of project operations and increase the ability to avoid, minimize, and reduce potential adverse effects to fish and aquatic species management concern. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with that, we are ready for an afternoon break. So what I propose is we go ahead and take about 15 minutes and come back at 3:30 where we can begin with cross-examination. Is there any concern with that before we break? All right, I'll see you at 3:30. All right, it's 3:30. I'll look first to Ms. Cott. Are you ready for us to go back on the record?
All set, thanks.
Great, thank you. I believe with that, we had heard summaries of direct testimony from all of the witnesses on the panel. We're missing one here, but assuming we can find her. I think next we turn to, there we are. We turn to cross, and I'm going to look to the coordinating NGO parties, relying on DWR, Reclamation, and state water contractors to speak up if you have any questions. And from the NGO parties, who is planning to go first? I'm looking to the room.
Yeah, go ahead, Glenn, you can.
I'm not planning on going first, but I do want to reserve about 45 minutes to question Dr. Wilder and Dr. Greenwood. I could do that at the end because there may be some overlap between our questions, so I'll defer to Mr. Schutz and Mr. Busher to go first.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll defer to Mr. Busher.
All right, I'm ready.
Mr. Busher. I'm sorry, Dr. Curdy, you have your hand up.
Yes, when the time's appropriate, I have some questions, particularly for Mr. Speranza on behalf of the Calusa tribe.
Great. Let's, if it sounds appropriate to you, I think the order we will proceed with will be, sounds like Mr. Busher and then Mr. Schutz, Mr. Spain, and then Dr. Curdy.
And I know enough about fish to be dangerous. I'm like Brett.
So
Sorry, I didn't know who said that and what was said. Sorry.
I think Mr. Green is off mute. Yeah, there we go. Ms. Kinsey or Mr. Kinsey, I'm going to have more than the rest of the day today. I'm
Understood.
happy
Yeah.
just now, but if Dr. Curdy is not available on Monday, I'm happy to defer to him if he's got a short, section for Mr. Speranza. And to the hearing officer, I don't have a preference whether I start right now or whether we wait until whether we have Dr. Curdy go first if he's not available on the 16th.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Curdy, do you have a preference?
I don't think this is going to take that long. So if it's okay, I might be able to be on Monday, but I can't be certain. So it may be in everyone's best interest if we follow that order.
That you go first?
Yeah.
That is fine with me. So let's please go ahead, and I will look to my team to, if you haven't already, pin the witnesses. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Curdy.
Okay. I suppose in some ways this can be directed at all the folks who gave statements or testified in this panel. But directly to Mr. Speranza, there was some interesting language around aspects of best available science or best available science. Can you define best available science A and who the communities are that sort of come up with this terminology and agreement of what does and does not count as best available science?
Sure. Yeah. And I would say that best available science, there are likely multiple different definitions. The definition we chose came from the National Research Council, which is the development through a process that meets criteria of relevance, inclusiveness, objectivity, transparency, timeliness, and peer review. And so we took that and used that both in the adaptive management plan as a reference and also in my testimony as a reference. And that is also used by the Delta plan.
Okay. Based on your definition right there, are you aware that the statement that one needs to be objective is itself a value statement and cannot be objectively achieved or demonstrated?
Objection lacks foundation.
It's pure logic.
Mr. Curdy, it does sound like you're testifying there. Can you try the question again to elicit it? Thank you.
Can you explain to us how through what you deem valid or sound scientific methodologies come to a finding of objectivity? You're saying you're objective, but how do you demonstrate that objectivity? through your own methodologies, through the principles and practices of your own methodologies of what counts as best available science.
So are we talking me personally or how the project would likely implement that?
Well, I would think if you were saying that you followed those dictates, that you yourself and the project would be parallel in terms of achieving objectivity.
So the project and I are obviously two separate entities. With respect to objectivity for myself, I would very much stay on the scientific side of this question, which is to formulate hypotheses and look at alternative hypotheses with equal measure, and a group of individuals, because this is generally a group component. But if it was just me, it would be me. Look at which of those alternatives are something that I would want to investigate to get to the end goal of what my question is. There would not be any preference or weight given to one to the other, and so therefore, the goal of whatever process would be find out answer X. The approach would be to identify different equal alternatives that all are given equal consideration, and then finally, whatever the results were, interpret those results based on the initial hypothesis. So that is how I would see being objective.
Okay, I have some commentary, but it's commentary, so I'll save that for a more appropriate date. So a question with that, you said you followed, I believe it was NRC, the NRC definition on best available science. Would you agree that certain bodies like the Executive Office of the President, Office of Science and Technology Policy, and the Council on Environmental Quality are at least equal to in terms of their expertise, their knowledge of science, scientific systems, scientific ways, scientific practices, scientific methodologies, axiologies, epistemologies, and ontologies, be at least equal to the NRC in being
Dr.
able
Curdy,
to define.
Dr. Curdy, can you just for the benefit of our court reporter, try to slow down a little bit? Those are big words.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Would you say, do you think it's fair in your opinion that these bodies are at least equal to the NRC in being able to have a valid and sound statement on what is best available science?
As I stated when we started this line, there are multiple best available science definitions out there. And so those entities that you've identified do make science-based decisions. And therefore, I would say that they have a very relevant perspective and would be, yes, equal to, if there is such a thing.
Are you aware in November of 2022 that these two bodies under the Office of the President of the United States put out a memorandum guidance to federal agencies that indigenous knowledge is an aspect of best available science?
I am aware of it.
So can you explain to us how indigenous knowledge, this is now well over a year and a half old, how indigenous knowledge informed what you're calling adaptive management strategies, adaptive management programs, your approaches to quote unquote experimentation and different bodies of knowledge, and what indigenous knowledge holders have been engaged as part of this process and in this program?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Let me try and answer this in a broad way, and if it's not, I'm happy to dive deeper. So the adaptive management process, and where we are now in that process, is we have a draft adaptive management plan. This plan was publicly available in the draft and final EISs. And so not being part of the overall consultation process with tribes and I am not familiar with that, and you would need to look at the testimony of the individuals that were part of that. With respect to how indigenous information and knowledge could be included within the adaptive management process for the sites project, as I said, we are in the draft phase, and this program is for operations that will start to happen in approximately 10 years. And so I think over the course between now and the probably many versions of this draft, the opportunities to have indigenous knowledge would likely be welcomed by the authority. I would certainly recommend it.
So with that, to gain some clarity, to your knowledge, the best of your knowledge, there has been to date no inclusion of the development of this adaptive management program or this adaptive management plan. There's been no inclusion of indigenous knowledge and traditional science holders in terms of its outline, in terms of what it's looking for, in terms of deep time, which can be understood as looking far into the past and far into the future simultaneously. Deep space in terms of the production of space, whether it's ideological, social, and or material. To the best of your knowledge, that has not yet been included to where we are currently with this plan, and therefore the findings and the outlines and the guidance of this plan.
I think in this case, I would circle back to something that I responded to the last question with, was the document that was put within the EIR-EIS, the final EIR-EIS. It was out for public review. That public review had public comment periods on it. We took comments on that. Comments were incorporated into the EIR-EIS. I can't remember if any comments were provided for adaptive management, but if they were included. You can find that in the track change version of the final EIR-EIS. And so that is the extent to my knowledge of what any public comment, indigenous or otherwise, has been solicited to this point.
So a question on that. I guess when we talk about the EIR, we're talking about a CEQA process. When we're talking about the EIS, we're talking about a NEPA process. When we're talking about an adaptive management program, we're talking about something that reaches, sure, within those contexts, those regulatory regimes, but also, I would suspect, beyond. If you're saying that you need to be emergent to difference, that you're emergent to what comes about, right? That's the whole point of adaptive management. As you said, it's what you don't know, what might be unexpected, and how you respond to those matters, to those issues, to those physics that are in front of you. It would seem to me that it would reach far beyond. So I think this is where I'm getting to, is when we talk about adaptive management, adaptation to what and why? Adaptation for whom? What exactly is this?
Dr. Curdy, we need a question, please.
Yeah, that's what I said. Okay. What is this adaptive management plan meant to adapt to? For what and for whom?
Thank you.
As stated in my testimony, the purpose of the adaptive management plan, as discussed, is to look at the current proposed operations of the project, along with potential future conditions, whether it be climate change, whether it be hydrology in the rivers, primarily based on the effects of the project to receiving waters, to just be general. So Sacramento River, and also associated waters such as American River, Feather River, and the Delta. It is not only to further the understanding of how our project integrates, how the project integrates to the overall regional slew of projects that are out there, State Water Project, Central Valley Project, but also really to help better understand what gaps are out there in data that will help the project operate better and meet its current and future permit requirements, environmental stewardship goals, and similar type of I would say similar type of activities. It truly is help, here at this point envisioned to help refine operations.
So the question, I guess, and you brought up data, and I think one question before my next question, it's important. Can you tell us the difference between data and information?
I guess if to split the hairs, data are points collected, and information could be data, but it could also be historical information. It could be written information, written text. So I guess it's information is a broader umbrella than what particularly, when I reference it, data are.
Well, I think a fundamental point there, and perhaps I can ask this, is what is the difference between data and information when it comes to interpretation, meaning, and authority?
Interpretation. Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah. What's the difference between data and information when it comes to interpretation, meaning, and authority?
I'm going to object as vague as to authority. Not sure what the reference is to.
The authority of who has a right to say what and when, and what is deemed valid or invalid, and what is deemed sound or unsound according to a certain community of knowledge holders.
Now I am confused about the question. Can you try the question again, Dr. Kurdi?
Yeah. Perhaps I can reframe it in a more direct way. And this will combine two questions with the one I'm asking right now. Something, Mr. Speranza, you had said is that you were pursuing this program through scientific quantitative data, correct?
Correct.
Correct. There's a gentleman named Marin Greenwood on the ICF website, available to everyone publicly right now. Quantitative analysis of fish and aquatic resources is usually the goal, but well-reasoned and defensible qualitative analysis may be more.
I'm sorry, can you start reading that again, please?
Sure. Yeah. Quantitative analysis of fish and aquatic resources
and
is
wait a minute, Dr. Kurdi. Can I slow you down? Are you quoting Dr. Greenwood, who's on this panel right now?
Yep.
Okay. But this is a question for Mr. Speranza.
It's a question. Yeah. It's a question for Mr. Speranza.
Okay.
Quantitative analysis of fish and aquatic resources is usually the goal, but well-reasoned and defensible qualitative analysis may be more appropriate in many cases. What I'm touching on here is in terms of a quantitative analysis, by definition, what you're doing is you're subsuming and filtering difference along either predetermined categories or typologies that you come up with along the way. When we're talking about indigenous knowledge and the role of indigenous knowledge, which is an aspect of best available science. Now, let's be clear. If you're only following one
definition— Dr. Kurdi, we need to get to a question, please.
Yes.
Well,
Well,
have your chance.
it's important, you know, the indigenous scholar Sean Wilson said it often takes longer to explain the background and meaning of a story than the story itself, right?
So I think this is not wrong, but we do need to stick to cross-exam here, and you will have a chance to tell your story in closing briefs.
Sure. So I think the question would be, to date, you've only accounted for quantitative analysis. Indigenous knowledge systems, which are aspects of best available science, you've said have not been included, pathways have not been included. You're relying on a CEQA document for a much broader goal. If the much broader goal is adaptation, so how has, to date, this program of adaptive management actually been adaptive for the environment, for communities, for human-environment relationships, outside of the narrow goals of sites to use water as an extractive resource to profit from?
Objection, compound, and argumentative, and assumes facts not in evidence.
That's fair, sustained. Dr. Kurdi, we have to break that one way down.
Yes.
One at a
I'm
time.
not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm trying to do my best in these lawyerly kind of talks, right?
I know, but this is not like a normal discussion. I completely appreciate that. It's very stilted.
I get it. I think the important point, the important question is, how have you accounted for qualitative differences and qualitative analyses in terms of fish impacts from knowledge systems that have a much deeper connection and a deeper knowledge base, and we can even use the terminology experimentation to come up with the findings that this is a sound or valid adaptive management plan without even including those knowledge holders who have the deepest and most intensive scientific knowledge.
Dr. Critty, try again. I mean, that's way too short. One piece at a time. One little piece at a time, please.
How is this adaptive management plan sound when it has neglected to date indigenous knowledge as an aspect of best available science? Is that good, Dr. Kenzie?
Well, we'll see.
I can answer that. Andy, I think I see what Dr. Curdy's getting at here. Dr. Curdy, we are in the initial stages of the adaptive management program. We have a draft adaptive management plan that needs to be extended out into not only the identified studies for fisheries and fisheries effects and operations and operational effects, but it also needs to take into consideration future permitting requirements, future mitigation requirements, mitigation performance. Where we are right now is the initial phases. And so I don't disagree that qualitative information is useful. I mean, I use it all the time in what I do. It has qualitative analyses have their place. And I do believe, as I stated earlier, that given that we are at the initial phase of our adaptive management plan and the start of the compilation of the adaptive management and science program, there will be, based on the Sites Project Authority's own goals and what they have said numerous times. Transparency is very important in the opportunity to hear public comment and take information from all folks, public, tribal, private, NGOs, is something that they have been and will continue to do. So I do believe there will be opportunities, especially for those who express interest, to provide the information that you're discussing, that you're bringing up.
So I have two more questions, and then I understand this needs to proceed. One question is, are you aware, Mr. Speranza, that the Calusa Indian Community Council is a federally recognized, self-determined, self-governing sovereign tribe?
I am.
Okay. So then, related to that, are you also aware that they're far more than the public? They're also rights holders?
I'm sorry. I'm not. I'm an aquatic ecologist. I'm not. Yeah.
So let me reframe that with the follow-up question, since he can't answer that one. In your opinion, your professional opinion, if Calusa or any other tribe, indigenous knowledge holders, best available science, aspects of best available science holders, attempted to inform you, HDR, ICF, Sites Project Authority, of any concerns that relate to their holistic understanding of adaptive management, and that was ignored, that was met with silence, or that was not addressed, in your opinion, would that be an act of negligence in terms of developing a sound and valid plan?
I'm going to object as to calls for a legal conclusion and calls for speculation.
I asked for an opinion.
Well, the term negligence, I'm not sure in what definition is involved there. Is legal liability? Is it duty?
So let's take the word negligence out and say, would it have been poor science to not have addressed all variables in front of you and not accounted for perhaps different knowledge systems in the development of this adaptive management plan?
I think going back to my testimony, which really focuses on the science component of this, and notwithstanding your desire to have that brought and I appreciate that. I think my opinion on this would be based solely on scientific data. And if we have scientific data that has been provided to us in a mechanism and means that it could be used and utilized and incorporated, then it should be.
So this then begs the question I'd asked previously that I think folks may have had trouble kind of wrapping their heads around, all filed of mine and not being clear. But this is what I was getting to when I was asking the question around authority on interpretation and meaning and interpretation. My understanding, Mr. Speranza, and please correct me if I'm wrong, let me know if I'm understanding you correctly. What you're saying is, if tribes gave you data that fit within your current knowledge system, your current methodological system, and was convenient within the guardrails of how you practice science, how you understand space and time, then you would have included it. But if they provided knowledge from their own knowledge systems, which again are aspects of best available science, then it would have been left out because it would not have fit into your predetermined category of what is and is not science. Is that correct?
I disagree with that.
So can you then explain to us what you were saying with that statement?
The statement that I made was that if data are available to us and it's applicable and appropriate, I'm going to take that last point back, and it's applicable to the problem being looked at, assessed, analyzed, and the information or data is, as I said, applicable to that and relevant, then it should be included.
Okay, sorry.
No, please, I'll just leave it there.
So let me ask this. What if the data that was being given and the information that was being given were clear insights into if this project, if the Sites Authority project even goes through, that it's going to erode and diminish tribal capacities for adaptation, social and environmental? Would that not be relevant to consideration? Because again, adaptation for what and for whom? That was the question I had asked earlier.
And again, I'd have to come back to the adaptive management plan is identified and described to look at the operational effects of the project with respect to diversions and aquatic resources. It's confined to those areas, and I wouldn't want to speculate how it could be expanded, based on your comments. And it's not out of disrespect. I'm a scientist, and this is about the aquatics components. And as I stated before, if we can incorporate information that's relevant, then we should incorporate it. Yes, I'll leave it
So
there.
am I understanding you correctly in that you're saying as an aquatic scientist, it would be wholly inappropriate for you to comment on any other domain outside your narrow interest and training and purview of aquatic science?
Well, I'm here today as an expert on adaptive management, and that is the capacity that I'm here in. I don't have any expertise in tribal or cultural, and I think that's where we're circling around. And so I would say that those questions are best left for individuals that are expert and have expertise in those areas.
Well, going back to the tribe being a sovereign tribe, only the tribe can speak for the tribe. Only the tribe is an expert on tribal matters. No one else is an expert by definition.
I'm not disputing that.
Yeah. So I think what's important is, I'll leave it at this last point, but are you aware that for the Calusa Indian Community Council, and I think it's fair to say every other affiliated tribe to this project area, that natural resources are cultural resources?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Curdy. With that, I will turn to Mr. Busher, I think. And I know we will start today and not, and we will go on. But if you would like to get started, please go ahead.
No, I'm happy to get started. For those of you I have not met, my name is Eric Busher. I am an attorney for San Francisco Baykeeper. I want to thank you all for your testimony so far today and your time being here. And Mr. Spranza, I'm sorry, Mr. Spranza or Dr. Spranza?
Mr. Spranza, I'm a couple years shy of a doctor.
Sounds good. Mr. Spranza, I'm going to start with you, and if we could put your slides back up from your presentation today.
That would be trying to look for the AHO reference here.
Yeah, it's sites 275 is the exhibit.
Thank you. You beat me to it. Thank you.
And if we could look at page 3 of this presentation. Oh, I apologize. Page 4. Terrible counting on. You had a brief discussion with Dr. Curti about this, but can you kind of point to us where we are in the cycle of an adaptive management plan as things stand today on this?
We are in phase 1, the planning phase.
And what part of phase 1?
I think we are squarely in define and refine the problems and moving towards establishing goals for the problems and management concerns that we currently are aware of. There's a lot to do to get off of number 1. And then as we go around the circle, the goal is to continually define and refine those problems.
Can you describe for me what you have defined or identified as the problem or problems as part of?
We have some that we've looked at. Certainly the uncertainties that I talked about today during my presentation and also included in my testimony. There are other components that have been identified in both the final EIR and EIS, as well as the ITP application for operations, in need of more in need of research, which would fall into the adaptive management. These would be things such as the effectiveness of pulse flows, the effectiveness of the screens at both both of our diversions, how our project interacts with other projects within sort of our region of influence. And just in particular, I'll pick out the Big Notch project, which is designed to move water onto the Yolo bypass and entrain juvenile fish, juvenile salmonids in particular, as well as provide fish passage. So those items are identified in Appendix 2D of the final EIS EIR, and there's a few more. I can look them up if you want me to.
No, I don't need that. I appreciate it and the citation. So when you're talking about the problem, it sounds to me like you're speaking in terms of lack of information, uncertainty about the existing information, as distinct from, like, there are endangered fish going extinct being the problem. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think the question we're asking is, based on what we know of the project's effects to those species, based on what consultation under the California Endangered Species Act and Federal Endangered Species Act. It's how the project interacts with those species and how we can best avoid, reduce, or minimize effects. Not, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Let me try it this way. Are the potential negative impacts to native fish species, especially endangered ones, part of what you see as the problem that adaptive management is trying to avoid or solve?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, I sort of missed the first part.
Yeah, is the potential negative impacts to endangered native fish in the Bay Delta part of the problem that adaptive management is trying to avoid or prevent or solve?
Yes.
In that context, has there been a specific problem defined in this process, or let's start there?
With respect to endangered species, sure, we can start with something with the in sturgeon. You know, as Dr. Greenwood stated, you know, sturgeon do spawn in the region of the Sacramento River that the project diverts from, and so one of the problems or questions, I would like to call them questions or management questions, would be, you know, how do the diversions interact with all life stages of that species, those species, both green sturgeon and white sturgeon. That's one of, I think, many that, you know, we could postulate on today.
With respect to any of the endangered native fish, has Sites Authority gotten to step 2 here of establishing goals and objectives for avoiding negative impacts?
I didn't hear the question on that. I apologize. I just turned up my volume.
Yeah. With respect to native endangered fish in the Bay Delta, has the Sites Authority gotten to step 2 in this wheel of establishing goals and objectives with respect to that problem?
Yes, I mean, we have some limited ones because we are primarily on step 1, but I think the overarching goal is environmental stewardship, and that's part of goals that were adopted by the authority in 2020, and also for those effects that can't be completely avoided, reduced, to assess how any proposed mitigation is meeting the requirements to fully mitigate and provide the identified habitat, food, and associated features that would be required within that mitigation. So I think those are good examples of both 1 and 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speranza. And now if we could go back to page 3. The bottom bullet point here identifies coordinate and collaborate with stakeholders.
Correct.
Who is, right, other than the Sites Authority and project participants, who's included in that group of stakeholders?
Yeah, so I apologize. I should use regional partners instead of stakeholders. So these would be entities like the Bay Delta Science Program, Sacramento River Science Partnership, research that's applicable research that's being done by, say, universities or NGOs in the Bay. I think those are some good examples.
Okay. And are any of those entities that you've identified already actively participating in this adaptive management, or is this a future goal?
I would say that they've participated to the extent, as I discussed with Dr. Curdy, where they've provided information and comments on existing documents that have been publicly distributed for comment. Some entities like DWR, but you asked me to exclude partners. Some entities like CDFW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, we have been interacting with them for years. And I would also add that this is the initial steps we're taking. And so there is a lot more outreach and a lot more sort of requests for meetings and coordination that will be coming once we better formulate some of the additional questions or problems that we are looking to understand better.
So I want to take those in buckets of groups, and there's the sites authority and the participants. There's other governmental entities, right? CDFW, federal entities, and then the other group of interested parties or local stakeholders or people. Other than the sites authority and the project participants, do any of those other groups have like a vote or a veto in terms of the decisions made in the adaptive management?
Well, certainly the regulatory agencies that you've mentioned would. So CDFW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS would have requirements when we're talking about adaptive management that's looking at reducing uncertainties associated with effects to listed species. Otherwise, I would say there's the input would be taken, and this is just my interpretation right now. As I said, this is what's in the draft, is that the authority does want to retain the ultimate decision-making process for which components of the adaptive management plan get funded each year. And so I would say that there's ample input, but ultimately somebody's got to make the decision of what to fund and what doesn't get the funding that year with respect to the research questions that are going to get addressed, and that would be the authority board in this case.
So the kind of decision-making power stems from either the authority or from those government entities taking regulatory action over the authority. Is that fair?
The ultimate, I guess, the endpoint decision making. I will say that when you get down into the science program, decisions will be made in coordination with those other NGOs and science programs that we talked about, because there are overlapping goals, overlapping concerns, and so I think decisions will be made at all levels. But I do believe the question you're asking is ultimately the authority board is going to have to approve what gets done based on their budget and based on where we particularly are on need for information.
And the public or interested parties may have an opportunity to offer their opinion, but the authority has no obligation to listen or to follow that opinion.
I would say to the extent that the public represents a lot of the individuals that are within the project area. I mean, the public are ratepayers to our are project members and partners. And so those individuals vote for their board, who some of which are represented on our board. And so I would say the public has a say in this, on how they approve their own particular boards, whether it's, you know, a large conglomerate, or if it's if it's like a small irrigation district. So to that extent, I would say the public does have a pretty large say.
You agree it's also a pretty indirect say in that context?
I mean, it would depend on the specific individual. It could range. You could have some individuals that are just check the box and move away, and some individuals who are very active. Many of those individuals have showed up on our public outreach calls for fisheries, water quality, water rights. Many of them have shown up, you know, as part of the water rights process. So I guess it depends on the individual.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. If we could go to page 5 of this presentation, please. So the first bullet point, this is the uncertainties that you've identified, correct? Let's start there.
Correct.
How much uncertainty is there in the validity of the modeling assumptions used in project planning?
So I am not a modeler, and I would refer you to the modeling team that came up. This would be so Mr. Micko, Mr. Whittington, Mr. Winslow, and Ms. Sadat, or Dr. Sadat. They're all doctors. But if you're asking me as the aquatic ecologist who works with models, there's 5, 10%, 5%. Everything falls within 5%. I mean, there's models are simulations of reality, and therefore there's inherent error or variability within them.
Let me try it this way. With respect to the adaptive management that Sites Authority is working on or proposing, how concerned are you about the validity of the models?
Well, I think we're very concerned about making sure the models are within the parameters that we've predicted. I mean, if we're predicting that, a flow of 10,700 CFS at certain types of year would have a certain effect on outmigration of juvenile fish, salmonids in this case, we can say, then we'd want to know that's actually making a difference. We want to know that it's actually doing something. So I think the authority is very concerned with the accuracy of the modeling, as are the agencies.
Do you have a kind of materially or substantively different answer with respect to the second bullet point there about the Shasta Reservoir exchanges and the uncertainty surrounding those?
It is very close to the same answer, although this is much more targeted. The exchanges with Shasta are really meant to help provide flexibility in management of the Sacramento River with respect to temperature, spring pulse flow, and fall flow stability. My particular interest has always been in how the project might be able to use that water to reduce temperatures at certain times of year in the upper Sacramento. And so the authority is, I think, very aware of small differences in modeling results can have big differences in I think, the effectiveness of water exchange, and they want to make sure that they use the adaptive management program to sort of fine tune those into the zone that provides them the best results consistently.
And then with respect to the fourth bullet point here, that starts operational details.
Yes, and I think I used this when we started on this slide with respect to the 10.7. You know, the goal of having flow maintained at 10,700 CFS at Wilkins Slough while we're diverting during October through June 14th is to avoid effects to listed species that are moving out, primarily juvenile salmonids. They're moving down the stream. If our timing is off, if our flows are slightly off, it could go up or down. Remember, airs go both ways. And so I would say that very concerned on the accuracy of that, you know, for the management of the species and also for the project ability to meet its goals.
Is that, so I read that bullet point as being make sure flows at Wilkins Slough are at least 10,700 once the project starts diverting, right? Confirm that the plan to keep them that high actually works. Is that correct?
So what this is it's actually a little more detailed than that. It is when the project is diverting, flows during October 1st through June 14th. Flows in the Sacramento River cannot be reduced at Wilkins Slough below 10,700 CFS as a result of sites project's diversions. So we can't control what other people do, but the sites project can control the fact that, you know, our diversions would not cause that reduction below 10,700 CFS.
Okay. Is part of the uncertainty about that bullet point for 10,700, whether that is the appropriate flow threshold?
Certainly. The study that was cited, Cyril Michel's study that was cited on that, there was a range of results, and you know, certain, and this is something that I think, you know, Dr. Martin or Dr. Hazarick should probably focus their response on to augment mine. But there are a range of responses that paper showed, and there were different plateaus at some at like 4,300, some at 22,000, and so 10,700 CFS was chosen, and it's important that, as I said, we achieve the project's goals, and we also achieve the goals that are meant to be the avoidance that is meant to be achieved through something such as a minimum flow.
So as part of adaptive management, I just hypothetically assume that the threshold that was proposed in the paper is a little bit off. It's actually, you know, 11,500. Is part of adaptive management to assess whether the flow threshold is protective and then change it as necessary?
Yeah, yes, I think that's the intent.
And can sites do that without amending its ITP application? It's ITP, and it's
provided. That's a great question. Sites can go if there is a different flow that seems to be effective, and its effectivity is, you know, clearly consistent, then the sites project could adjust their component of this minimum flow upwards, but because we have 10.7 listed as one of our diversion criteria that's in the water rights application, that's in our current permits, we could not go below it without revising the permit application. In this case, the ITP.
Okay, so when you say permit application, you mean the incidental take permit application, not the water rights permit application, or do you mean both?
Incidental take permit. Yeah, that's where I'm focusing on. Yes.
So whatever the Department of Fish and Wildlife does on the incidental take permit, your opinion is that adaptive management could be used to provide more protective flows, but not less protective flows than that take permit requires.
Well, I do think it can go both ways. It can, more protective. I don't, those aren't the words that I would choose. I would choose more effective and less effective. And what I would say is that if flows are shown to be, if the protections are shown to be, have a substantial benefit higher, then the authority could move higher under CISA. You can't go below what's set as a minimum threshold in your permit application or in your ITP. That wouldn't be allowed. But should the authority choose, it could make that higher without having to amend its incidental take permit.
And is that something, right? Should the best scientific evidence show, once the project is operating, that flows higher than 10,700 at Wilkins Slough are needed, is that something that the adaptive management program is intended to then implement to ensure that those higher flows are provided?
The adaptive management program, we'll go there, will be designed to identify the effectivity of whatever our current proposed, in this case 10.7. Should evidence come out that identifies higher flows are needed, I mean, that would be something that would go through the adaptive management team and up, through the adaptive management governance structure, as I said, ultimately to the board, and the board would make that decision. Yeah.
And then, Mr. Sprans, I think you may be the right person to answer this, but if you don't know the answer, I'm happy for anybody else to provide one. Do you have an estimate for the river miles or river kilometers between Keswick Dam and the points of diversion for the sites and the delta?
I'm going to need help on that. Sorry. I have it written down. I don't have it by memory.
Anybody else want to offer an answer to that one before I change the subject and move on? All right. Thank you, Mr. Speranza. Dr. Wilder, I have some questions for you. Well, and hearing officer, if you want me to stop, feel free to interrupt. I'm happy to keep going until 5. I'm happy to stop whenever you would like.
I think I'm going to have you go until about 4:45.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
I have a few questions for you in general about the salmonids in your testimony today. Do you have an estimate of a survival rate for any of the runs of Chinook salmon for egg through San Francisco Bay that is kind of necessary or appropriate to support the continued existence of the species?
you're asking what the historic survival rate is of these species, or of these races?
Well, so I was not. I was going to ask that as well. I'm curious, right? Is there a threshold survival rate that you view or that the science indicates is right necessary for the species to, abundance to increase, for example?
I know I've come across it, but I don't have that exact value in mind.
Can you ballpark what that would be? Or, I mean, I don't want you to guess. So if you requires a guess, tell me that. But if you can give me an estimate or a ballpark for what that is, that would be great.
It unfortunately would be a guess at this point. Sorry.
No apology. You said during your testimony, you were talking about the sturgeon, right? I think your testimony was that in general, more flow is better, decreased flow is worse. Is that correct?
That was an assumption we used for an individual analysis, yes.
And is that with respect to both white and green sturgeon?
That was the assumption we used, I believe, in the analysis.
Do you think that assumption is correct?
There's certainly more evidence that it's true for white sturgeon. The species have, they're both sturgeon, so they share biological characteristics. I think the short answer is probably.
Do you think the same is true for salmonids in the Delta and Sacramento River?
Certain aspects of their biology, certainly. Others, certainly not.
Okay. And so the impact of flow on salmonids depends on their life stage. Is that correct?
Life stage and specific component of their habitat or other, habitat environment.
Would that include like the reach of the river where the fish happened to be at that time?
Yes.
Would that also include differences between the various runs of Chinook salmon?
Yes.
Several times in your testimony and discussing the results of the analysis or was described, you conclude that there are no unreasonable adverse impacts to the various species or groups of species that you are opining on. What do you mean by no unreasonable adverse impacts?
Primarily effects that would have, a substantial effect on the species.
What does substantial mean?
Large, repeated effects that would affect the population.
Do you agree that determining whether something has a substantial effect on the population, the baseline of the population is going to matter quite a bit?
Could you define baseline of the population?
The current status of the population?
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
And so what may look like a really small impact, right, if you have a thriving fishery, might be a really big impact if you have an endangered species. Is that fair?
Good. Yeah.
I think I'd need more context to be able to answer that.
Well, let's give a hypothetical, right? If there was a 2% negative impact on the abundance of, two different native fish or two different fish species from the CITES project, one of those fish species was endangered, one of those fish species supported a thriving fishery, is that 2% change in abundance the same for both of those, or is it evaluated differently? in terms of what reasonable impact?
Proportionally,
I'm
it
going
would
to
be
object as just vague and an incomplete hypothetical, just by labeling the species endangered. I'm going to object on those grounds.
I'm going to overrule the objection, but noted. I'll let Dr. Wilder caveat as appropriate in his response.
Yeah, I mean, proportionately, they're the same. That they're, are a certain percent of the population goes down.
So for a species with a thriving fishery and a species that is listed as endangered, 2% is 2%, no difference.
Proportionately, yes.
Well, just in terms of the actual impact that has on those two species, not proportionally.
Well, on an absolute level, there would be, in this hypothetical situation, there would be more fish lost, if that's the right word, under the thriving fishery scenario.
Is it your opinion that small negative impacts on endangered species are reasonable?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening to the first half of that. Could you repeat it?
Is it your opinion that small negative impacts on endangered species are reasonable?
They certainly can be, yes.
Is there any difference in determining whether an impact is reasonable or not? Does it matter at all whether the impacted species is or is not endangered?
Again, if it's the same proportionate difference, then I would say there's no difference.
If we could go to one other question about your summary here. On page 9, you noted, again, no unreasonable adverse impacts to Chinook salmon, and then provided some information about fall run, late fall run, and then winter and spring run.
Excuse me, could you just identify the exhibit as is it the presentation, Mr. Busher? 279C.
I'll hope that's the right number. I think so.
I think it might be helpful if we could pull that up.
That's fine.
It's not this slide, right? What was the slide?
Not.
Were you possibly looking this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Page 9. I thought I said that out loud.
Oh, no. Well, maybe you did, but I didn't hear it.
Page 9, please. Thank you. So Dr. Wilder, on here, in the last bullet point, you refer to minimal effects to fall and late fall run Chinook salmon. Are those minimal negative effects?
They're minimal effects. I believe they're in a negative direction, but they're, minus 2%, 1%, something like that.
percent. What a percent of what?
It would be either mortality, meaning there was higher mortality under the project relative to the no action, or production, juvenile production, in which case there would be higher production under the no action than the project.
And then you identified beneficial effects to winter run and spring run. Do those, where do those beneficial effects come from?
Yeah, and I said that with hesitance. I think if we went through the transcript, I did say it was a small beneficial effect, but those were positive effects, meaning the opposite of what I described for fall and late fall. Higher higher juvenile production under the project and lower mortality under the project, if I recall correctly.
Do you know what causes, or do you have an opinion on what causes those small beneficial effects?
Well, the only two knobs you can turn in the model are flow and temperature. So it's one of those, but I don't recall which one, or if it was both, are responsible.
Okay, thank you. Do the small beneficial effects you described show up in the flow or water temperature related analyses referred to here?
Yeah, and this is where my hesitance came in. I mean, there are small beneficial effects we see in some of the temperature analyses, but I deemed them too small to think that they were having an effect on the species, and therefore I concluded that there was no or minimal impact.
Okay. Are the, I don't know, magnitude or lack thereof of the impact in the SALMOD results materially different than the results in the other two models, or they're all really small and you've just worded it a little bit differently here?
No, they tended to be larger. I mean, this is a I don't know if this is the right term, but it's a kind of a conglomerate model. So it incorporates more than just a single aspect. Some of the other analyses we did looked specifically at a single habitat characteristic of a life stage or a specific mechanism for how flow or water temperature could affect the species. SALMOD itself looks at all of the early life stages, puts it all together, and looks at both water temperature and flow related effects combined. So, you know, in my opinion, it carried a little more weight than these other individual analyses, similar to what a life cycle model might do.
I take it from that SALMOD is not a life cycle model, though?
It's really not, no. At the end of each season, the number of individuals, the number of eggs that it's seeded with starts over. So in that respect, it doesn't go year over year the way a life cycle model would.
That makes sense. Thank you. And then I neglected to come back to this earlier when I had asked you about the survival ratio. Do you have an estimate for actual survival rates of Chinook salmon from egg to bay?
An estimate of probably less than 10% survival.
So Ms. Kenzie, that's a good spot for me to pause.
Great.
Thank you.
Mr.
To the witness. I'll see you all on Monday.
Thank you. And thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. With that, at least for the day, you're excused. We'll see you on Monday. For the rest of us, just a couple points that I wanted to go over. One is that the board members, of course, are very interested in this proceeding. And one of the challenges for me as the coordinator of all of this is complying with open meeting rules and bringing them all together, because if we have a quorum, 3 or more, we need to be in person, at least the board members do. So there's specifically an interest in having opportunities for 3 or more of the board members to be in the room, whether in person or virtually, for some of the protestants' cases in chief, because they were able to have that opportunity for the applicant. I wanted to let you know, for purposes of planning, of course, we'll always have the hybrid option. It's not, the Zoom will always be an option. But I'm generally looking at, and part of this too is based on room availability. That's another limiting factor. And then I wanted to look to you because to the extent your witnesses may be available in person or not, I realize that may take some planning. Of course, your witnesses may appear remotely. That worked fine the last time. But I'm looking at September 30th, October 2nd, or October 8th. What I will likely do is notice, and I have to provide the notice at least 10 days in advance, which means we won't exactly know where we are. So there's a lot of challenges here. But I think what I'll do is notice 2 of those 3, and then if we can either have 2 as a hybrid or maybe just 1, depending on how things work out. But I wanted to give you that advance notice so you can start thinking about what might make sense and whether there's kind of coordinating agreements in thinking about if there's a particular panel of witnesses or group of witnesses you want to put on the dates I was looking at. So I'm putting that out as a heads up, but based on that, are there any comments or concerns or input about scheduling additional hybrid days? I think I would make a decision. We would have a chance to talk again on Monday, and then I would try to get something out on Tuesday. Mr. Hitchings.
Yeah, I guess I just asked the question, is there a desire on the side of any of the protestants to actually provide their case in chief live or in person versus just using the hybrid virtual format?
Right, which you can always do. It may be that the board members and I are sitting in a room together somewhere because the open meeting laws require them to be in person if there are enough of them. But we can do it that way. So this is the awkward. There's so many factors here. So that is part of what I'm asking. And we can we can put it on calendar and then in terms as a hybrid and then move to Zoom. I don't think that's a problem. Mr. Schutz, you are off mute.
I think we'd like the weekend to review and discuss, and if we could come back on Monday, I think we could have a more well thought out answer.
Thank you. That makes sense. Mr. Mooney.
I was just going to say as well, and but also we've kind of told our witnesses that it was being able to appear by Zoom, and I think some people might have made arrangements as such, and also without knowing. Of course, my phone starts to ring. But now I lost my train of thought. But yeah, we would need the weekend to talk about it, but
that makes sense, and that's why I wanted to bring it up now.
Okay.
Ms. Kenzie, this is the court reporter. May I say something?
Yes.
Just for my purposes, I don't know if you needed and I have to go off the record for me because I can't type me talking at the same time. Right. But for me, being on Zoom is a lot easier just to keep track of everybody and who's talking. So I don't know if you would need me live or if I could stay remote.
I think we can address that as we get there. As far as I can tell, if you are able to track everything by Zoom, which we should be able to do, then we should do it the way that works best for you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. King.
Yes, not that I have significant testimony, but I'm not going to be available October 8th.
Okay, thank you, Mr. King. Ms. Meserve. We can't hear you still, unfortunately. And I don't know why that would be. You're not on mute. It may be, if we can't work out the technical, you could send an email to the service list. That would be great. I
There
apologize.
were some times today, Miss Kenzie, when I was also having trouble with my audio and I had to do sort of the same thing Mr. Hitchings did, which was to log out, shut down my
Reboot.
computer, start again. So there may be something, I thought it was just me, but it may be something with your interface. So it's something to be aware of.
Maybe mine or Zoom. I would just blame Zoom. Yeah, maybe that's all right. So thank you for your, just put that in your minds and consider that and let me know as you have input on that. As I said, I'm trying to coordinate a lot of different features of this, and I haven't run this by the board members and their schedule. You know, they have very specific schedules too, so it's still in discussion. The other thing is that the other matter that I have is for you, Mr. Hitchings and Mr. Ferguson, and it's really a request for information arising out of our site visit and seeing in person the footprint of the reservoir. I looked back at the parcel map. I saw that was submitted, I believe it was site 16, something like that. What I didn't see, which you may well have just not submitted because it wouldn't necessarily be relevant, is a list of parcel owners with contact information. I am asking for that list of parcel owners for the footprint of the reservoir. And then also site 16 includes the track of the proposed Dunnigan pipeline pathway, if you will. What I would plan to do, I realize that if to the extent you have it, that might be personally identifying information. We wouldn't just throw it up on the FTP site. We'd put it in our internal record. But of course, anyone who wanted to obtain it could submit a Public Records Act request to get it. But that would be my intent with names and addresses of parcel owners. But is that something that you could provide sometime next week? I assume you have it, but that may be wrong, but something you possibly could provide next week, and you may not know off the top of your head.
Yeah, I think we need to circle back with the sites team on that just to find out what the state of records are, and we could report on that on Monday if that works.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any other procedural issues we should address before we break until Monday morning at 9 a.m.? Great. Well, thank you very much. We're adjourned for today, and I will see you on Zoom on Monday morning. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.